Hey there, and welcome back. However the day has treated you, whatever you are still turning over as you lie there, you can let all of it go loose now, because nothing further is being asked of you tonight. This is one of those evenings made for going a very long way from here, and going quietly, and I am glad of the company. Because tonight we are travelling back over 5.5 centuries into a world almost nobody was ever allowed to see. Every queen of the Middle Ages lived the entirety of her life inside a ring of women. They dressed her and undressed her, brushed out her hair, slept on pallets at the foot of her bed, carried her letters, held her secrets, and stood between her and everyone else alive. And they were sworn, every one of them, to say nothing of what happened behind that door. Tonight I am taking you through it. We are going into the private chamber of the most talked about Queen England had ever produced, a woman who was not born royal at all, and we are going in as one of her ladies on our first day of service. Just let yourself be carried, and here is the thing that has drawn me back to that chamber more than any other. 2 winters before the evening we are entering, one of the women in that room knelt on cold stone in a lodging under sanctuary, in hiding, in fear of her life, while a Queen of England gave birth to a son with no bed of state, no cloth of gold, and no midwife of any rank at all. That woman carried what she saw to her grave. Tonight, for a few hours, you and I are going to be allowed inside. Before we go any further, let me say one thing, and then the evening belongs entirely to you. Nights like this one are the reason I do this at all, and it is a real comfort to me, while the story unwinds, to think of the rooms scattered across the earth where somebody is lying in the dark and listening. So if you feel like it, you are welcome to leave a note below telling me where you are tonight, and what hour it has reached with you, because I love looking through them and finding half the map represented there, each corner of it drifting towards sleep in its own time. And if evenings of this kind are something you would like to find your way back to, you are welcome to subscribe gently whenever it suits you, so that the next of them can come and find you. That is all of it, and it is more than enough. Now, let us go to the Queen. Picture this. It is an afternoon in the spring of 1472, and you are sitting in the stern of a wherry on the River Thames, being rowed upstream toward Westminster, with everything you own in a corded chest at your feet. The tide is with you, and the boatmen work without hurry, and the water slides past the hull, the colour of weak tea, wide and busy, and smelling of mud and rope, and the sea some miles off. Behind you, dwindling, the crowded roofs of London, the spire of the old cathedral, standing over the city like a raised finger. And around you all the traffic of the river, going about its afternoon, barges heaped with timber, a wherry crossing, with 2 arguing lawyers in it. Swans cutting their unbothered lines through the wake. Ahead on the northern bank, the water stairs are coming into view, and above them the walls and gatehouses and the sprawling grey pile of the Palace of Westminster, and beside it, greater than any of it, the Abbey. Somewhere behind those walls is a room you have never seen, on the far side of a door that is kept shut. And by supper tonight you will be standing inside it in a new gown of the Queen's colours, with your hands trembling, being told the rules. The oars lift and dip. The palace grows, and your life is about to become a secret. The wherry noses in among a dozen others at the King's stairs, and a boatman puts out a hand to steady you onto the wet stone, and you climb, and the river drops away behind you, and Westminster closes over your head. It is not one building. Nobody who has only heard of palaces understands that. It is a walled town of buildings, thrown up and patched and added to across 400 years. Halls and chapels and lodgings and kitchens and stables and storehouses and clerks' chambers, all of it crammed onto a low island of gravel between the Thames and the marshes, and all of it in motion. A gentleman usher goes past at a half-run with a rolled parchment. 2 carters are having a quarrel about a barrel of ale that is blocking a doorway, Somewhere behind a wall, a smith is working, and the sound comes flat and regular over everything else. And under that always, low and continuous, the murmur of several hundred people living within earshot of one another. Above the roofs to your left rises the enormous flank of the Hall of State, its buttresses like the ribs of a beached whale. Ahead and to the right, the Abbey, so tall it seems to lean over you, its scaffolding still climbing the western end after 300 years of building. Your escort has been sent to meet you, a woman of about 40 in dark wool, with a bunch of keys at her belt and the practical courtesy of someone who has done this many times, and she does not waste words. Your chest will follow. Your horse, if you brought one, is already spoken for. She has looked at your travelling cloak once and formed an opinion of your family's finances that she will keep to herself. As she walks, she tells you things you must know before you meet anybody, and they come at you too fast, and you understand later that this was deliberate, because the first lesson of the chamber is that nobody will repeat anything twice. The Queen is at Westminster until the moving of the court. The King is here also, which means the palace is fuller than it likes to be. You will be sworn tomorrow, not tonight. Until you are sworn, you speak to nobody outside the Queen's own people, and you will not, on any account, on any provocation, at any hour, repeat outside these doors one word of what you hear inside them. You are walking through the public palace as she says this, and you can feel it changing around you. The outer courts belong to everybody, to petitioners and messengers and the men of the law courts that sit in the great hall, and they are loud and open and dirty and full of chances. Then a gate and a guard who knows your escort and does not know you, and looks at you as long as he likes. Then a quieter court, better paved, where the men have badges on their coats and speak in lower voices. Then a stair and a corridor with hangings, and the noise of the palace fades behind you the way the noise of a street fades when a door swings shut, until you become aware that you can hear your own shoes. You have crossed from the King's England into the Queen's household, and the border was not marked, and you cannot now find the moment it happened. A reigning Queen's household is a kingdom in miniature, and it has its own everything. Its own chancellor, who runs it, its own treasurer, who accounts for the manners and the customs and the wardships that pay for it, its own council of lawyers to fight for those rents when a tenant proves stubborn. It has a steward, an almoner, a confessor, a physician. It has clerks and cooks and grooms and carters, and a laundress with an under-laundress and children to fetch water. Several hundred souls in all live off the Queen's coffers and wear her livery, and every one of them knows precisely where they stand in relation to every other. And at the heart of that whole clockwork, occupying perhaps 6 rooms of a palace with well over 100, is the place all of it exists to serve, her own lodging, her private chambers, and it is toward these that you are climbing now. You come to a door. It is a good one, oak, banded, with a man on either side of it, who carry staves and stand as though standing is a profession, which for them it is. Beyond it, your escort says, you do not go without leave ever, and neither does any man in England below the rank of the king himself. She raises her hand. She knocks. And while you wait, in that last moment of being an outsider, look about you at the door and the men and the silence and understand what it is you are about to be admitted to. Because the geography of a medieval palace is not architecture. It is meaning made out of stone. And each of those thresholds and stairs and guarded gates exists to answer one question, which is who may come near. Think of it as a set of vessels, one inside another. The outermost is the Hall of State, where the household eats and the world does business, and where in theory anyone may come who has cause. The crowd there is enormous, and a king who dines there in public is performing kingship at 100 people. Within it lies the chamber of presence, where a canopied chair of estate stands empty, most of the day and occupied for 2 hours of it, and where you may be presented, and where ambassadors are received, and which is public in the way a theatre is public. Deeper again the privy chamber, and now the numbers have fallen away. The room is warm, there are cushions, and the people in it are the ones who are trusted. And within that, last of all, the bedchamber, where a queen actually lives, where she sleeps and prays and is sick and weeps and does her hair and receives her husband and speaks the things she means. There are perhaps 20 people in England admitted to that room, and after tomorrow you will be one of them, and you will not be the highest ranked among them. And it will not matter, because access is not rank. Access is its own currency, and it is about to be paid into your hands. The men in England who own castles and armies and half the counties of the West would give a fortune to know what is said in that innermost room. They cannot get in. Their wives, mothers, and daughters can. That single architectural fact is the reason ladies in waiting exist. The reason every noble house in England schemes to place a girl in the Queen's chamber. And the reason the woman with the keys is looking at you now, on this side of the door, with an expression you cannot interpret, while somewhere beyond the oak a voice says something you do not catch, and the latch begins to lift. You will meet her presently, and when you do, you will have to keep your face still. And so, before that door opens any further, let me tell you who she is. Because in the England of this year, there is no name that starts more arguments than hers, and half of what is said about her is not true, and the true half is stranger than the invention. She was born Elizabeth Woodville at Grafton in Northamptonshire, most likely in the year 1437, and she was born into precisely the sort of family that does not produce queens. Her father, Richard Woodville, was a knight of decent Northamptonshire stock, a soldier, respectable and utterly unremarkable in a kingdom stiff with ancient earls. It was her mother who made the family interesting. Jacquetta of Luxembourg was a woman of blood so exalted that Europe still blinks at her marriage. She came of a princely house of the Low Countries. She counted emperors among her forebears. And she had come to England as a girl of 17 to be the second wife of the Duke of Bedford, brother of one king and uncle of the next, the greatest Englishman of his day. And when Bedford died and left her a young widow with the rank of a duchess, Jacquetta did the thing that shaped everything afterward. She married, without leave and without any advantage to herself whatsoever, her late husband's chamberlain, a handsome nobody named Richard Woodville, for no reason anyone has ever discovered, except that she wished to. The court fined her for it. The court forgave her, and she went on to bear that handsome nobody 14 children, of whom the eldest was a girl with pale gold hair and her mother's straight back. So Elizabeth grew up in a country manor, as the daughter of a duchess and a knight, with royal blood on one side and none at all on the other. And she was married young, as girls were, to a decent Lancastrian gentleman called John Grey, and bore him 2 sons, and lived the sort of life that fills church monuments and no histories. And then the Wars of the Roses came through her house like weather. Her husband was killed fighting for the losing side at the Second Battle of St. Albans, and the estates his mother controlled were tangled up in the confiscations that follow lost wars. And Elizabeth found herself a widow of about 24, with 2 small boys, no money to speak of, and a legal claim she could not make anybody honour. Every widow in England knew that situation. Almost none of them found a remedy for it. She decided to petition the new king in person. Here the story turns into a ballad, and I must warn you that the ballad may have grown in the telling. For the oldest sources say only that she petitioned him, and he liked her, and it is later writers who give us the oak tree. But the tale as England tells it is this. Edward, 4th of that name, was hunting in the forest near Grafton, a young man of 22 years, crowned, tall beyond ordinary men, blazingly handsome, easy-tempered, and famous already for the number of women who had found him difficult to refuse. Elizabeth waited for him under an oak by the roadside with her 2 boys beside her, and knelt in his path and asked for her son's inheritance. He took her hand and raised her up, and then he asked what men in his position always asked, and she said no. Consider the nerve of that. She was 5 years his elder, of no political importance whatever, entirely in his power, and asking him for a favour. And every rule of her world said that a king who wants a knight's relict and gives her back her lands to sweeten it, has made a fair bargain by the standards of the age. She told him, so the story runs, that she was too poor to be his queen and too proud to be his mistress. Whatever passed between them, this much is beyond dispute. She refused him. He came back. She refused him again. And on the 1st day of May, in the year 1464, in a room in her mother's manor at Grafton, with almost nobody present but Jacquetta and a priest and 2 women, the King of England secretly married her. Nothing in the whole century caused a scandal like it. Understand what a royal marriage was for. It was the single most valuable piece of property a kingdom possessed, the treaty that bought an alliance, the wire that bound one realm to another, and at that very hour, the greatest man in England, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the soldier who had put Edward on his throne, and who is remembered still as the kingmaker, was standing in France negotiating a French princess for his king. Edward held his tongue for 4 months. He let the negotiations run. Then, cornered at a council meeting in September and pressed to name a wedding date, he told them he was already married to an Englishwoman, a widow, a commoner, with 2 sons and no dowry, whose father was a knight and whose late husband had died fighting for the other side. The council sat in silence, and the silence has never really ended. Warwick, humiliated in front of the French court, went home to nurse an injury he would eventually try to settle in blood. The old nobility, who had spent their lives measuring the world in degrees of birth, discovered a knight's daughter walking before them at every ceremony in England for the rest of her life. And England as a whole, which loves a love story more than it admits, was left with a thing that will not resolve. Either it was the most reckless act by an English king in living memory, or it was the only thing he ever did purely for himself. It was probably both. Whatever else you think of Edward, and there is much to think, he stood by it. He never repudiated her, never sought an annulment, never once in 19 years allowed anybody to suggest in his hearing that the marriage was anything but valid. And in a century, when a queen could be set aside for barrenness or politics or nothing at all, that steadiness is worth putting in the scale. The scandal was survivable. What followed was not. Elizabeth had, remember, 12 living brothers and sisters, and no fortune to settle on any of them, and the way one provided for kin in that world was by making matches. So the matches came, and they came fast. Her sister Margaret to the heir of the Earl of Arundel, another sister to the heir of Essex, another to the heir of Kent. Her brother John, aged about 20, to the Duchess of Norfolk, who was somewhere near 65 and one of the wealthiest widows in the kingdom, a bargain the whole country called a shame. Her father was made an earl and then treasurer of England. Her eldest son was married to the greatest heiress alive. In 4 years the Woodvilles swept the field of England's great heiresses, and every noble family that had been quietly saving a rich orphan for their own second son watched a Woodville take her. Do not be too quick to condemn any of them. Every family in England did exactly this with exactly this ruthlessness. Whenever fortune put them in reach of it, the Nevilles had done nothing else for 2 generations. And Warwick himself was the richest man in England because his grandfather had married well and his father better. The Woodvilles' sin was not that they played the game, it was that they were nobody and they won. That is why the hatred was so personal, and it is why, when Warwick finally rose against the king, the first thing he did after his victory in the field was to take Elizabeth's father and one of her brothers and have them beheaded without any trial worth the name. And the second thing he did was to accuse her mother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, of witchcraft, and put her on trial for having ensorcelled the king into the marriage. The charge failed. It was always absurd, but it never entirely died, and it will be raised again. And the woman you are about to meet has now spent 8 years being told, by men she must smile at, that her mother is a witch, and her marriage is sorcery, and her children are the fruit of a spell. That is who is sitting on the other side of this door. Keep your face still. And there is one more thing you must carry through that door, because it is the reason the chamber beyond it is the way it is. And every woman in the room shares it, and none of them will speak of it in front of you until they are certain of you. 2 years ago, this kingdom turned upside down. Warwick, having failed to master the king he had made, allied himself with the exiled queen of the old Lancastrian line, the woman whose husband still lived, mad and pitiable, in the Tower. And in the autumn of 1470, he came back across the sea with an army, and Edward, betrayed by his own brother, was caught unready in the north and fled the country in an open boat with a handful of men and no baggage, and nobody in England knew for months whether he was alive. Elizabeth was in the Tower of London, 8 months gone with child, with 3 small daughters. She had hours. She got her girls and her mother into a barge on the Thames at night, and went upriver to the Abbey precinct at Westminster, and claimed sanctuary, which is the ancient right of any hunted soul to be untouchable on holy ground. And the abbot took her in and lodged her within the Abbey precinct, and the gates closed behind her. She was there for 6 months, a queen who was no longer a queen, in cramped quarters within a stone's throw of the palace she had ruled, hearing the bells of her own abbey. The men holding London had no wish to storm sanctuary and make a martyr of her, and no intention of feeding her either. What she and her household ate came from the charity of the abbot and from a London butcher named Gould, who sent half a beef and 2 muttons every week for as long as it lasted, and whose name, I am glad to say, survives when the names of dukes have not. Her mother was with her. A midwife of the city named Marjorie Cobb was permitted in, and a physician and a handful of women, and that is who was in the room. In November of that year, when the Queen of England lay down in a borrowed bed in those refuge lodgings and gave birth, without ceremony, without cloth of estate, without any of the mountainous ritual that surrounds a royal birth, to a healthy boy. The child was the heir. He was the first son Edward had, and he came into the world in a place of refuge with an old woman of London at his mother's knee, and no herald to announce him, and no godfather grander than an abbot and a prior. And then the wheel turned again. In the spring, Edward came back with a borrowed fleet, and landed and gathered men and rode south, and the capital opened its gates to him. And he went straight to the abbey and walked into sanctuary, and was shown his son for the first time, a boy 5 months old, and the accounts say that the king wept. 3 days later he fought Warwick at Barnet in the fog and broke his army, and Warwick died in the rout. And 3 weeks after that, at Tewkesbury, he broke the Lancastrians so finely that the old line ended there. On the field and in the abbey afterward. And the mad old king in the Tower died within the month, and men did not believe the notice that said he died of melancholy. Every woman in the chamber you are about to enter lived through that. Some were in those cramped rooms and some were not, and those who were not have never quite been forgiven for it, and nobody says so. That is the ground beneath the carpets in this household. It is why they laugh so readily and trust so slowly. It is why the Queen watches doors, and it is why the first rule they will teach you is silence, because these women have learned in the hardest school England could devise precisely what a loose word costs. Now the door swings inward, and the warm light and the smell of rose water and wood smoke come out to meet you, and a voice within says, quite calmly, "Bring her in," and you go in. The first thing is warmth, and the second is colour. And the third, absurdly, is that it is smaller than you imagined. You have been thinking of thrones. This is a chamber, some 10 paces by 12, with a fire going in a stone hearth, and painted cloths, and one true tapestry on the walls, and rushes on the floor with dried herbs trodden through them, and the sweetness of that under the smoke, and beeswax candles, though it is barely dusk. There are cushions on the window seat. There is a little dog asleep on one of them. Somewhere out of sight a bird is muttering in a cage, and there are women, 7 or 8 of them, standing and sitting and sewing, and one of them reading aloud from a book in her lap, and every single one of them has stopped what she was doing and turned to look at you. And at the far side, in a chair with arms, with an embroidery frame pushed aside and a letter in her hand, is a woman of about 35 who does not stand up. You have heard for years what she looks like, and the descriptions have not been generous, because they were written mostly by men who disliked her, but they all agree on the hair, which is the pale gold, the age called silver gilt, and which is nearly out of sight now, beneath a headdress of dark velvet, and they agree on the eyes, which are heavy-lidded and grey, and give away nothing, and on the extraordinary stillness of her, which strangers take for coldness, and which is not coldness at all. She has the long, straight neck her mother's family bred for. She is dressed magnificently and without a single ornament that is not doing work, and she is looking at you exactly as a woman looks at a horse. She has agreed to buy unseen. You do what you were taught on the boat and go down and stay down. The moment stretches, the fire ticks, and then she speaks, and her voice is lower than you expected and entirely level, and she says your family's name, and your father's, and the name of the aunt who spoke for you, and the sum your father has settled on you, and the fact that you were ill at Candlemas, and where your 2 brothers are, and what your grandmother did in the bad year, and none of it is a question, and it is all correct, and it takes perhaps 15 seconds, and it is the single most frightening thing that has ever happened to you. Then she tells you to rise. And when you do, she looks at you a moment longer, and something in the corner of her mouth alters by about the width of a hair, and she says that she knew your grandmother, and that she was a woman who could keep a secret, and she hopes it runs in the blood, and behind you somebody exhales, and the woman with the book starts reading again, and the dog on the cushion stretches, and just like that, without ceremony, without any oath yet sworn, you have been let in. It takes a week to learn the shape of the room, and I will save you the week. There are perhaps 100 women in the Queen's employ across the whole household, from the laundress to the ladies of estate, and they are not one body, but several, stacked, and the distances between the layers are enormous, and never spoken of aloud. At the summit stand the great ladies, who are attendants in the way that an earl is a soldier, meaning honorifically and on the great occasions. These are duchesses and countesses, sometimes the king's own sisters, women who hold vast lands of their own and come to court for coronations and christenings, and the 12 days of Christmas, and then go home to run their estates. Their presence is an ornament to the Queen and an advertisement of their own standing, and they receive fees for it. And everyone understands the exchange. Below them, and doing the actual work, are the ladies and gentlewomen of the chamber. 5 or 6 or 8 of them, sworn to the Queen's person, resident, paid, fed at her expense, dressed in her livery. Some are married women of good family, whose husbands are about the King's business. Some are widows for whom this post is a life raft. Some, like you, are girls of gentle birth in their late teens sent here to be finished and married. In this chamber, in this year, several of them are Woodvilles, because of course they are, and to understand the room, you must know that the Queen has 3 of her own sisters within call, and 2 nieces, and that her closest woman of all is her sister Anne, and that a family which has been accused of witchcraft and had its men beheaded by an earl does not afterwards staff its private rooms with strangers. Below them again, and never confuse the two, come the chamberers. These are women of lesser birth, or of no birth at all, who do the physical labour of the queen's rooms, and it is a great deal of labour. They carry the water and the wood and the coals, they empty and scald the close stool, they strip and remake the bed, they beat the cushions and change the rushes, they wash and mend and press the linen, the endless linen. A gentlewoman hands the queen her comb. A chamberer swept the floor she is standing on at 5 that morning, and lit the fire, and will be on her feet in there at midnight, and sleeps hardest of anyone in England. The gulf between the two ranks is unbridgeable, and everyone above and below it treats it as though it were a law of nature. And the only sound thing I can say about it is that the queen herself remembers the names of her chamberers, and their children's names, and it is remarked upon. And there are the men, 4 of them, and their existence tells you everything about the strangeness of this world. There is the Queen's Chancellor, a bishop or a lawyer, and her confessor, and her physician, and the gentleman usher who commands the door. They come in by invitation, they leave when told, and not one of them sleeps within these walls. Any other man who crosses that threshold, whatever his rank, has by that act committed something between an impertinence and a crime, and the men on the door will stop an earl. The only exception is the king. Now, how did you get here? Not by being pretty, that is the least of it. And the ballads have done real damage. You got here because somebody wanted something. It may be that your father has a lawsuit before the Queen's Council and needs the case looked at kindly. Or your uncle wants a wardship, or a license to export wool, or a place for his son in a bishop's household, or the Queen's favour spoken into the King's ear at the right hour. Perhaps your family is simply old and poor and has calculated that 4 years in that chamber will get you a husband worth twice what your dowry could otherwise buy. Because a girl who has served the Queen is a known quantity, vouched for, polished and connected, and the marriage market prices her accordingly. Whatever the reason, the mechanism was the same. Somebody with access spoke to somebody with more access. A letter was written. A gift was sent, discreetly, and it was not a bribe. Because in this age, nobody has invented the idea that a gift and a bribe are different things. You give a present to a person who might help you, and it is called courtesy, and both of you know exactly what it is. Your aunt, who once served Jacquetta of Luxembourg, went to the Queen's sister Anne. Anne mentioned you, and in a room you never saw, at a moment nobody recorded, the woman by the fire said yes. And so you were sent, with a chest and a horse and instructions from your father you will hear in your sleep for years. Serve her well, say nothing, watch everything. Write to me by no hand but our own man. Remember whose daughter you are. What you will be paid is not enormous. Your fee is reckoned in marks and paid at the 2 half years, and it is not really the point. The point is what comes with it. Your food and drink, which is meat twice a day and bread and ale without limit. A diet richer than most of England will taste at Christmas. A place to sleep, firewood in your allowance in winter, and candles in your allowance always. 2 gowns a year in the Queen's livery, in her colours of good cloth, and this is a serious asset, worth more than your fee. A gown of murrey and blue is a costly object, and it is also a uniform that announces, in every street and every hall in England, whose woman you are. Your horse's fodder, your servant, if your rank allows one, and, unwritten, unquantifiable, the thing your family actually purchased, which is that you now stand within 10 feet of the Queen of England several hours a day, and can be spoken to, and can carry a word. There will be a swearing tomorrow, and it is brief, and it is not about loyalty in any warm sense. You kneel, and you put your hands between the hands of the Queen's Chamberlain, and you promise to be true to the Queen, to serve her, to keep her counsel, to reveal nothing of her chamber, her person, or her business, to any creature living. Then you rise, and somebody hands you a folded gown of murrey and blue, and one of the older gentlewomen shows you where the linen presses are and how the queen likes her cushions set, and you have crossed over. You are inside now, and on your very first night, lying on a pallet in the outer chamber, listening to 7 women breathe, you will understand the arithmetic that governs this room. And it is very simple. Everybody outside these walls wants what you now have, which is the Queen's ear. Everyone within knows it. And every single person you will meet from this day forward, however charming, will be measuring how much of you can be bought, and for how much, and by whom. Before you were sent here, you were made, and it took 15 years, and almost none of it was what a later age would call schooling. You were taught your letters in English, and enough French to follow it, because French is still the language of romance and of law, and a lady is expected to follow it, and some Latin, enough for the responses and for your book of hours. And you were not taught Greek, and did not miss it. You learned to write a hand, and you were taught it by a chaplain who rapped your knuckles for blots. You learned to reckon, and seriously, a woman who will run a manor must hold the accounts and check a bailiff's roll and know when she is being cheated in Roman numerals, and your mother drilled you in it at a table with counters. And she was better at it than your father. You were set to the needle, and I do not mean prettily, plain sewing, and fine sewing, and cut work, and black work, and how to lay gold thread with a couching stitch, so that no gold is wasted on the wrong side, and how to judge cloth by the feel of the selvage. You were set to spin. You were given the still room, the herbs and the distilling and the salves, because when a servant crushes a hand, it is you who will see to it. You were shown how to keep bees, to salt meat, to brew, to know a good horse, to fly a hawk, to sit a saddle for 6 hours in the rain. You sang and played an instrument after a fashion, and you danced a great deal, because the dance is where you will be looked at, and above all you learned the thing this age calls courtesy, and it is not manners in the trivial sense. It is a whole moral technology, and there are books of it in every gentle household, written in rhyme so that children can memorize them. How to enter a room, how to hold your hands, how to eat, to wash before and after, to take salt with the point of your knife, and never with your fingers, to keep your nails clean, not to lean on the table, not to speak with your mouth full, not to pick your teeth at meat, not to dip your meat in the salt cellar, not to blow on your soup, not to wipe your knife on the cloth, to offer the dish first to the person of higher rank at your left, to watch, always, without seeming to be silent. That above all, the courtesy books say it a dozen ways, and the great ladies of this century say it to their daughters in letters we still have. A woman's speech is her fortune or her ruin. Let it be little. Let it be kind. Let it come late. You will notice that everything you were taught was practical, and that not 1 hour of it was spent asking you what you wanted. And you will also notice, when you have been in that chamber 6 months, that you were trained precisely and expertly for the life you now lead. The reckoning, so that you understand the wardship your uncle wants. The needle, so that your hands are busy while your ears are not. The horse and the hawk, so that you can be out on the water meadows at dawn with a queen. The courtesy, so that you can carry a cup on one knee to a woman who is being watched by her enemies, and neither spill it nor tremble. And the silence, which is the entirety of your profession, and which was taught to you before you could write your own name. The day begins in the dark, and it begins with the chamberers, and by the time you are permitted to be useful, the room has already been made ready by women you barely see. They are up before 5. The fire is fed and coaxed. Fresh rushes are strewn where yesterday's have been swept up, mixed with lavender and meadow sweet, so that the room smells of a mown field. Water is heated in the outer chamber and carried in, and there is a basin of silver and an ewer and towels, and a little bowl of the Queen's own washing paste. which is made of ground almonds and rose water, and something the receipt calls sweet powder, and everyone in the chamber is quietly certain, includes musk. Wine and ale and manchet bread are set on a cupboard, because a queen does not walk to breakfast. Breakfast walks to her. The great gown for the day has been decided the night before and is laid ready, and I promise you that decision was not casual and took longer than the deciding of some wars. Then the bed curtains are drawn back, and the day of the Queen of England begins, and there is nothing private about it whatsoever. This is the first thing that will shock you, and the last thing you will ever get used to. Her body is not hers, it is a public object of state importance, and its condition is a matter of policy. And it is handled every morning by 5 or 6 women in a choreography as strict as a dance, and as unremarkable to them as walking. She rises. She uses the close stool behind a screen, and a chamberer will presently carry away what is in it. And this being an age of physicians, its appearance may be reported on. She is washed, standing, in warm water, by women who do not look at her and do not look away. Her shift of fine linen is drawn over her head, then the stockings, gartered above the knee, then the kirtle, laced at the back by 2 of you, because nothing in this age fastens where its wearer might reach it, and that is not an accident. A woman who cannot dress herself is a woman who is never alone, and the great of the earth are never alone. Then the gown, and here the room quickens, because the gown is the argument the Queen is making today. Her calendar will tell her which saint's day it is. Her chamberlain will have told her who is expected, and out of those 2 facts, the colour is chosen. Murray, the deep mulberry red and blue, are her liveries, and her people wear them. For herself, cloth of gold, or crimson velvet, or black damask, which is the most expensive black in Europe, and looks sober only to those who have never priced it, and any of them may be furred, and the fur is a language of its own. Ermine, the white winter coat of the stoat with the black tail tips left in as spots, is by law hers and hers alone, and a handful of others. Nobody else in England may wear it. And to see it moving on a sleeve is to see the law made visible. Sables, minever, all of it stiffened and weighted so that the wearer moves slowly and cannot slouch and cannot run. And that too is intentional. Then the hair, and I want to give you the hair, because more nonsense has been written about it than any other part of this world. It is combed out, and it is famous. And it is nearly the last of her body that anybody will see. It is then dressed close to the head, plaited or bound, and pinned and covered. Over that goes the headdress, and the fashion of this precise decade is the one everybody thinks of when they think Middle Ages. The tall cone, the hennin, or in England, more usually, its cousin the butterfly headdress, a wired construction of stiffened linen and silk, and gauze rising from the crown and holding up a veil of gossamer so fine you can watch the fire through it. The hairline is plucked back to make the forehead high, the eyebrows plucked to nearly nothing, and the whole architecture is fixed with pins into a foundation, and it takes 2 women half an hour, and once it is on, the Queen cannot lean her head against anything for the rest of the day. Everything about this room says the same thing in 100 ways. She is not being made comfortable, she is being made into a queen, each morning, piece by piece, by other women's fingers. Last comes the jewellery, brought from a locked coffer by the woman who keeps the key, and it is chosen the way the gown was chosen, to be seen and understood. A collar of gold and enamel with her husband's badge in it, worn on a day when she wishes to remind a visitor whose wife she is. A gold cross that was her mother's rings, which are put on over the gloves in the fashion of the year, and her rosary, which is not ornament, and which will be in her hands within the hour, because the first business of every morning is God. She goes to Mass, and goes daily, and this is not a formality, but the load-bearing beam of her existence. Her private oratory adjoins the bedchamber, a small vaulted room with an altar and a painted panel and a cushion. On greater days she goes in procession to the chapel royal, or crosses to the abbey, and the ladies walk 2 by 2 behind her with their beads in their hands. She hears mass on her knees. She has her own book of hours, painted for her, and she has the Latin of it, being a lettered woman in a century when many great ladies were not. And one of her books carries an inscription written by her own fingers. Afterward, the alms a bag of coin carried by a lady and given at the door of the chapel to the poor who have gathered there, and this is done every day of her life, and the poor of Westminster know the hour. And I want you to sit with that a moment before you decide you understand her, because the woman who will spend this afternoon in ruthless negotiation about a wardship and this evening playing the coldest hand of cards in England is on her knees on stone at 7 in the morning with her eyes shut. And she means it. Her age did not experience those two things as a contradiction. She founded a college at Cambridge. Her book of hours is worn at the pages of the Psalms about enemies. Nothing in this chamber is simple, least of all the piety. And if you go away tonight thinking that these were people playing at faith while pursuing power, you will have missed the whole texture of them. They believed, they also schemed. They did both with their whole hearts, and it never once occurred to them that anybody would find this strange. Of all the women in this household, the one nobody ever writes about, and the one who knows the most, is the laundress. And if you would understand the secret world properly, you must go down to where she works. Her name is on the household roll, and she is paid a fee, and she has an under laundress and 2 girls, and they work in a yard by the river or in a room with an enormous copper, and their hands are ruined by the time they are 30. The washing is done with lye, which is wood ash steeped in water and drawn off a caustic liquor that lifts grease and burns skin, and with soap when soap can be had. And it is beaten and rinsed and beaten again, and wrung between 2 women braced against each other, and spread out on grass or on bushes to bleach in what sun England provides, and brought in stiff and cold and smelling of nothing at all, which is the entire point. Then it is smoothed with a glass slickstone or a stone of polished agate. Then it is folded into presses with lavender and orris root and sweet cypress and stored. And when Elizabeth puts on fresh linen, the whole apparatus of her wardrobe has produced, at ruinous cost in labour, a single sensation, which is coolness against the skin. There is more of it in this palace than there is silk. Shifts and shirts, sheets, pillowberries, towels, napkins, altar cloths, kerchiefs, coifs. Everything that touches a body is of that cloth. Everything a body is seen in is wool or silk. And that is the medieval solution to the problem of cleanliness, which they had considered far more carefully than their descendants ever gave them credit for. The outer garments are almost never washed, because you cannot wash cloth of gold, and they are brushed and aired and perfumed instead. The linen next to the skin is washed constantly. A person of rank in this century changes her shift daily and her gown twice a year, and she is not dirty. And the notion that she was filthy is a slander invented by people who never considered the matter. And so the laundress handles everything. She takes away the sheets in the morning, and she knows what happened in that bed. She launders the Queen's body linen, and can tell to the day when her courses come and when they have not come. And so, sometimes, she is the first person in England to know that there will be another royal child. Before the Queen has told the King, before the Queen is sure herself, she handles the clouts and the girdles of that monthly business, which this age surrounds with silence and some superstition, and a great deal of plain practical washing. She sees the blood of a miscarriage and says nothing. She has washed sheets after a lying in and after a death. Nobody consults her, nobody thanks her by name in a chronicle. Kings have no notion she exists, and every noble house in Europe understood perfectly well that the laundress was among the half-dozen most dangerous people in it, and paid her decently, and kept her close, and did not let her go. When you are old, and the last of the ladies of that chamber, and a young clerk comes to ask you what the Queen was truly like, you will find yourself thinking of a woman with red forearms in a steaming room by the river, who is dead now, and whose name was not written down. And you will understand that she carried as much as any of you, and that she also, all her life, said nothing. And then, for most of the day, nothing happens. And that emptiness is the work. Come and sit with them in the privy chamber through a long morning and watch what a lady-in-waiting actually does. There is a fire, and there are stools and cushions and one chair, and the light comes in, slanting through glass in the upper lights and horn in the lower. The women sit in a loose arc. Each of them has her hands full. This is the first thing that surprises everybody, that the ladies of the greatest chamber in England are all day working with their hands, and the work is textile. Shirts for the king, which the Queen makes herself as her successors, will make them for their husbands. Because a wife of any rank shirts her husband, and it is a wifely act, and not a menial one. Altar cloths for the chapel hangings, christening things, purses, cushion covers with the Queen's badges, the gillyflower, the white rose, the falcon. A vast crimson bed hanging that has been in progress for 2 years, and will be in progress for 2 more, worked in gold thread on velvet, and it is the room's cathedral. One of the women reads aloud while the rest sew, and the choosing of the book is itself a small politics. It may be a saint's life. It may be, and increasingly is, a romance, one of the enormous French tales of Arthur and Lancelot and the quest, or a translated Boccaccio, or the tales of Troy. This is the decade when a merchant named Caxton is in Bruges translating such things into English, and within a few years he will bring the printing press to Westminster and set it up almost within sight of this window, and the world of books will crack open. Sometimes the reading is stopped so that a point may be argued. Sometimes it is stopped because a lady has come in with news. Meanwhile, children come and go because the royal nursery is close and the Queen's daughters are small. Musicians play in the outer chamber, or one of the ladies plays. A merchant is admitted, with cloth. The physician looks at somebody's hand. A greyhound is thrown out for a crime. 2 of the ladies play tables, and there is money on it, and they are quite serious. Somebody's letter arrives from the country, and the news of a bad lambing at somebody's manor in Kent is discussed for a quarter of an hour with the gravity of statecraft, because these women own land, or their families do, and a bad lambing is not nothing. And underneath all of it, all day, unceasing, the current that gives the room its charge, they are talking, not gossiping, or not only. They are exchanging information, which, in this world, is the only commodity that never spoils. Who has come to court? Who has not been summoned? Which of the king's counsellors kept his hat on? Whose wife is with child? Whose is not? And whose has been sent home to the country, and why? Who was seen speaking with the Duke of Clarence's man, and where, and for how long? It comes in through the doors, on the tongues of relations and servants and merchants and priests, and it is sorted and weighed and stored, and each night some of it goes out again in letters, and the Queen sits sewing in the middle of it, with her eyes down, and hears everything. Now, let me tell you about the silence, because it is the true subject of this evening. And it is the thing the histories cannot show you. To serve in a chamber is to spend your life in possession of dangerous knowledge. You learn that the Queen is with child before her husband does. You would know, before anyone in England, if she had wept, and for how long, and whether she said a name. You can tell when the king came to her and when he did not come for a fortnight, and how she was the next morning, and what everybody in England would give to be told it. You have watched her nurse a bad tooth. You have noticed that she is frightened of one particular man, and that when a certain family's name is spoken, she goes entirely still. You could name which of the ladies is being paid to report to somebody, and guess within a mark what she is paid. All of it because you are in the room. Bodies cannot lie in front of the women who wash them. And you never, ever say, not to your mother, not in a letter home, not on your deathbed. If you have done it properly, and the astonishing truth of the medieval chamber is that mostly they did do it properly, that is precisely why so little has come down to us. The chronicles are full of battles and full of men, because men wrote them. The Queen's chamber has left us wardrobe accounts, a few names in a list of fees, a handful of wills, and silence. And the silence is not an accident of survival, it is the achievement of the women in this room. They were the best informed people in England, and they took it with them. The code has grades, and every girl learns them in her first month. There is what you may repeat to anyone, which is what the Queen wore. There is what you may repeat within the chamber, but not beyond the door, which is what the Queen said about what she wore. There is what you may confide only to the one other woman you would trust with your life, and there is the matter you never speak of at all. And you will not even let yourself think it in words in case your face thinks it too. And each woman in this room is carrying 2 or 3 of those, and none of them knows which the others carry. They cannot even be honest about their honesty. If you are known to be discreet, you become valuable. And the moment you become valuable, men begin to court you, and gifts arrive, and a great Lord Steward mentions in passing that his master admires you. And your own uncle writes asking, with the utmost delicacy, whether the Queen has spoken of the wardship. That is what it costs to be trusted. That is the trap at the centre of this beautiful room. And the women here manage it, day after day, with nothing but nerve and a straight face. And the price of dropping it once is the ruin of a family. And the reward for a lifetime of never dropping it is that history will not record your name. Look around at them, sewing, laughing, reading aloud in the firelight about a night in a forest. Every one of them is holding something. That is the secret world, and you are standing in it, and you have been in it now for less than a day. Tonight, when the Queen is at her prayers, you must write to your father, and the writing of that letter will teach you more about this world than a year of watching. Begin with the object. Paper exists. Come lately from Italy, and is used for rough work. A serious letter is written on parchment, prepared skin, and the sheet is cut from a larger one, and the edges are not straight. You cut your own quill from a goose feather with a small knife, and you will do it several times before the evening is out, and the sharpening of that nib is the reason the little blade is called a penknife. Your ink is oak, gall, and iron and gum, made up in the household or bought in a shop by the abbey, and it goes onto the skin brown and dries to black, and it does not sit on the surface as ink does now. It bites into the parchment, which is why a scraped-out word leaves a ghost. Now the writing itself. You were taught, being a gentleman's daughter, and you can form a decent secretary hand, and this is not universal. Plenty of ladies of good birth dictate everything they send, and there is no shame in it, and the household clerks are used to it. But there is a rule of this world that you learn early. Anything you dictate has been heard by a third person. Anything a clerk sets down, a clerk has taken in. If it matters, you write it yourself. However bad the hand, then the shape of it, and the shape is armour. You begin with a greeting so elaborate that a modern eye would think it satire, and it is not. You commend yourself to your father, you desire his blessing, you rejoice in the health of his household, you thank God for it at length. Then some news that is not news. The Queen is well. The court removes to Sheen at Whitsun. The weather in the south is fair. Then, buried in the middle where the eye slides past, the actual matter, in words that would mean nothing to a stranger. Our cousin's business goes forward. The gentleman we spoke of has been much at the door, but is not let in. My lady's sister asked after you kindly, and I said what you would have had me say. Then you close, and you commend yourself again. And you write the date by the saint's day, and not by any number, and you sign. Then it must be sealed, and a sealed letter in this century is a physical fortress. The parchment is folded small, and folded again, and a slit is cut, and a strip is threaded through it, and wound about the packet, and hot wax is dropped over the strip, and your seal is pressed into it. To open it, the strip must be cut, or the wax broken. There is no way to open this packet without destroying the fact that it was closed, which is precisely the point, and then it goes. And here is where the fear lives. There is no post. There is no royal service you may use. Your letter travels by a servant of your own family, or by a friar going that way, or by a merchant's man, or by a carrier who takes packets for a fee along a road, and any of them may be robbed or bribed or simply curious. And any of them may be waylaid by a lord who wishes to know what is being written out of the Queen's chamber. Everybody in this century has had one go astray. Everybody knows a family ruined by one that was opened. That is why you set down nothing that would hang you, and why the truly dangerous news never goes in writing at all. It goes in a man's head, spoken to him twice so that he has it exactly, and he rides for 4 days and says it aloud in a room in Northamptonshire, and no parchment has ever existed. And so the parchment goes out into the dark in a saddlebag, saying almost nothing in a beautiful hand. 4 days later, a man in Northamptonshire holds it to a candle and understands every word of it, because he taught you the code before he ever taught you to curtsy. Nowhere is the strangeness of this life plainer than at the bed, so let us go into the bedchamber while the room is empty and look at it properly, because it is the most valuable object in the household and the most political piece of furniture in England. It is enormous. The frame is carved and gilded, and the ropes beneath the mattress are tightened with a wooden key, and there are mattresses, plural, straw beneath and feather above, and sheets of linen so fine they are listed in inventories by name, and a fur coverlet. And above it all, a tester and curtains of cloth of gold, or figured velvet, that enclose the whole of it, like a chamber inside the chamber. Making it is a ceremony with rules. 2 chamberers do the lifting. A gentlewoman oversees. The sheets are shaken out and drawn straight, and the corners are made just so. And in some households, on some nights, a woman must roll bodily across the mattress before it is dressed to prove that nothing has been hidden in it, and then holy water is sprinkled, and the curtains are drawn. She never lies down alone. 2 women are always within the curtain's reach, one of gentle birth and one not, and a light is left burning low. If the Queen stirs, if she is sick, if a dream takes her badly, a hand is there before she has finished calling out. She has not slept alone since she was a child in Northamptonshire, and she will not sleep alone again until she is very old. And when the king comes, which he does, and it is his own decision and no one else's, he comes to her, past the 2 men with staves, and the women who have undressed her withdraw to the outer chamber and pull the door to, and sit in the dark together, and wait. Somebody must be within call. That is the office, so there they sit, 6 women, saying nothing, hearing perhaps nothing, until they are called. And in the morning, one of them will look at the sheets, because it is her business to look, and the Queen's condition is a matter of state, and everyone in that chamber can count the weeks. This is what body service means, and there is no way to make it sound anything but astonishing. These women know a queen the way a mother knows an infant. They see her bare, they see her sick, and hold the basin. They see her in the fury she permits herself nowhere else, and see her afraid. In the year we are visiting, Elizabeth has already borne the king 4 children and will bear him 6 more. And each of those pregnancies was carried in the sight of these women. And each of the deliveries are the innermost secret of the whole hidden world. And now we come to the strangest and most female thing in the whole of medieval court life, which is the lying in, roughly a month before her time, that the queen takes to her chamber, and the phrase is exact, and here is what it means. There is a mass and a ceremonial spiced wine in the great chamber, and her lords escort her to the door of her lodging, and there the men stop. And they do not come in again, not one of them, not the king himself, until she has been churched, weeks after the birth. The door closes. And behind it, for those weeks, everyone is a woman. Each duty performed by a man in that household is performed by a woman for the duration. The ladies are butler and pantler and cupbearer and usher. They carve the meat. They serve the dishes on the knee. They announce visitors. They keep the threshold. The chamber itself has been prepared like a shrine and like a tomb. The walls and even the ceiling are hung with rich arras, and any hanging that shows figures or beasts has been taken down and replaced, because the images might frighten the mother or mark the child. One window only is left uncovered, and dimly. The floor is carpeted. There is a bed of estate for show, and a lesser pallet for the actual work. There is a great cradle, and a little cradle, and a font of holy water, and relics, and a girdle borrowed at ruinous expense from an abbey, which will be laid on her belly, and the pains prayed through with Saint Margaret, who is the patron of women in labour. Why so dark? Why so sealed? Because this age believes that a woman in childbed is at the edge of life, half in and half out, at her most powerful and her most defenceless, and that the room must be made womb-like to hold her. And because underneath the theology there is a plainer knowledge, which each of these women carries and none of them says, which is that childbirth kills. It is the likeliest end in the world for a woman of her rank. In that darkened room they are not conducting a mystery, they are keeping a vigil. And here is where the sanctuary comes back, and where you will finally understand the Queen's ladies. They had done all this for her 3 times, all the ritual, the arras, the borrowed girdle, the rank, and the cloth of gold. And then, in the November of the year of the great fall, they did it for her in 2 low rooms of the abbey precinct, with a butcher's charity in the larder, and no arras and no relic, and a midwife from the city. When the Queen was not a queen, when the king was a fugitive, somewhere across the sea, and might be dead, when the child in her body was either the heir to England, or the last hostage her enemies would ever need. They kept the vigil then too. It went well. It might so easily not have. And the boy who was born on that night in a borrowed bed, with none of the pomp and none of the safety, is asleep at this moment in a cradle 100 paces from where you stand. And he will be sent to Ludlow to learn to be a prince, and 11 years from now he will be 12 years old, and his father will die suddenly, and he will be proclaimed King of England. The women in that room, who fed his mother, and held her hands, and swore never to speak of it, would live to see him vanish, and her back in sanctuary a second time, with all of it to do again. But not tonight. Tonight there is a fire and a fur coverlet, and the sound of somebody breathing on a pallet in the dark, and the whole household of the Queen of England lies within 20 feet of one another, sleeping, in the safest few years any of them will ever have. Sooner or later, somebody in the chamber falls ill, and then you will meet the medicine of the 15th century, and I want to be fair to it, because it is easy to sneer, and the sneering misses what these women actually experienced. The Queen has a physician, a university man who has studied at Oxford or Padua, who wears a gown and a ring and is paid handsomely, and who has never in his life cut a body open. What he knows is the ancient system of the 4 humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each with its qualities of hot or cold, moist or dry, each rising and falling with the seasons and the hours and the stars. Illness in this system is imbalance. The physician's task is therefore to diagnose the excess and correct it, and the tools are diet first, then herbs, then the sharper remedies. And the sharpest and most trusted is bloodletting, done by a surgeon or a barber on a day the almanac approves, from a vein chosen for the organ concerned. He will inspect the urine, holding the flask to the light, and he will do it with real learning, comparing colour and sediment against a chart of 20 shades. And he will draw conclusions that are wrong. He will cast a figure of the heavens for the hour the sickness began, because astrology is not a rival to medicine in this century, but a branch of it. Taught in the universities, he will prescribe a syrup of violets or a purge, and the purge will be violent. And he will be personally kind, and will sit with her, and will speak to her in Latin, and she will answer. Around and beneath him works everybody else. The chamber has its own store of remedies made by the ladies themselves, and any gentlewoman of competence carries recipes in her head, or in a book that came from her mother: rose water for the eyes, honey for a burn, chamomile, betony, wormwood, comfrey which they call knitbone, and which does knitbone, willow bark for a fever, which contains, though nobody can say so, the thing that will one day be called aspirin. The surgeons, who are looked down upon as tradesmen, are in fact the ones with hands and evidence, and their bone setting is excellent. And their battlefield work in this generation of wars has taught them things about wounds no physician knows. And the terror behind all of it is not the fevers of ordinary life. It is the plague. It has been in England for 120 years, since it first came out of the East and killed a third or more of everybody in this kingdom, and it comes back and back, roughly once a decade, and when it is in London, the court leaves within a day. Nobody understands it. The best guess is bad air, and so they carry pomanders, and burn juniper, and shut the windows. And there is a second horror, newer, the sweating sickness, which has not quite arrived yet, but is coming, and which kills a strong man between dinner and vespers. That is what these women live with, and it explains something you may otherwise mistake for coldness. Each of them has buried a child. The Queen has buried at least one. Half the babies born in this kingdom do not reach 5 years old, and the mothers of the 15th century love their children exactly as much as any mother ever has, and grieve them, and go on. When the chamber's talk turns light and hard, when they joke about death, because it is standing so close, do not take it for callousness. It is what people do when the alternative is to be afraid every hour of the day. The physician goes. The candle is set by the bed of whichever lady is ill, and one of the others sits up with her, and they say the prayers to Saint Roch and Saint Sebastian, who guard against pestilence, and they hold her hand. And this, in the end, is the whole of medieval nursing, and it is not nothing, and it is what any of us would want. The older women in the chamber talk about it still, and when they do, the younger ones go quiet, because none of them saw it, and all of them wish they had. It was 7 years ago, in the May of 1465, and it was the answer to everything that had been whispered about her. And it lasted 3 days. She came up the river from Eltham to the Tower, and London came out onto the water to meet her. The barges of the city companies were dressed with banners and silk, and one of them carried a machine, a device with figures that moved, and there was music on the water for a mile. The king made 40 knights of the Bath that night in her honour, so that she had a private guard of new-made men who owed their rank to her coming, which was not sentiment, but strategy. And the next day she rode from the Tower through the length of the city in a horse litter of white cloth of gold, bareheaded, her hair down over her shoulders, like a bride, and like a virgin, and the streets had been swept, and the conduits ran with wine. At each station along the way there was a pageant, and the pageants were not decoration. They were an argument. There were angels who sang to her. There was Saint Elizabeth, her name saint, and Saint Paul, the city's own patron. And in one pageant she was greeted by figures who spoke verses declaring her descent, not from a Northamptonshire knight, but from her mother's princely house, from the ancient lords of Luxembourg, and from Melusine, the water fairy from whom that house was said to spring, a woman with a serpent's tail who could not be looked at on a Saturday. So London stood in its thousands and was told that the new queen came of a line touched by the uncanny, and cheered because the 15th century loved that story. And 11 years later, when men wanted to destroy her, they would remember it and call it witchcraft. And the same descent that made her marvellous would be turned round to make her monstrous. Nothing was ever given to this woman that was not also, later, used against her. Then the abbey. She walked barefoot on a cloth of ray, striped cloth, laid from the palace to the church door, and behind her went duchesses, and behind them the nobility of England entire. And each step of that walk was a legal act. She was anointed with holy chrism on the head and the breast, which is done to no one in England but a king and a queen. And after that anointing, she was not simply the king's wife. She was a consecrated person, set apart, and to touch her was sacrilege. The crown of St. Edward's regalia was set on her head. She was given a sceptre and a rod. And in the middle of that abbey, in front of all the men who had sneered at her marriage, a woman who had knelt in a road 3 years before to beg for her son's inheritance sat crowned in the chair of the Queens of England. Her mother watched from the ladies' seats. Her father, the knight, watched from among the earls, being one himself by then. And the older women in your chamber, who were girls then, say that what they remember is not the gold or the singing, but the silence when she went past. And the way she carried her head, that is what the ceremonies are for. That is why she eats in silence on a golden chair, while duchesses kneel. Everybody in England knew what she had been born. The apparatus of ritual existed to make it irrelevant. And it worked for 18 years, and it worked so well that the men who eventually pulled her down could not simply say that she was low. They had to say that she was a witch, and that her marriage was invalid, and that her sons were not lawful. They had to unmake the sacrament, because the sacrament was all that she had, and it had held. When the weeks are done, and the mother has been churched, meaning blessed and received back into the ordinary world at the church door, the household exhales and the ceremonies begin again. And since we are speaking of ceremonies, I want to show you a meal, because a foreign gentleman once wrote down what he saw at this queen's table, and the account has never stopped astonishing people. He was a Bohemian nobleman, travelling for curiosity, and he was permitted to watch a great feast at Reading. Some 60 women were at the tables. The queen sat alone on a costly golden chair and ate in silence, and her own mother, the Duchess Jacquetta, and the king's sister stood before her. And when the queen spoke to them, they knelt and remained kneeling, and did not rise again until she had bidden them over and over through the length of the meal. All the ladies present and all the men held their tongues. The music played. Nobody spoke. It lasted, he says, 3 hours. Hold that picture. The most powerful ladies in England on their knees on the floor for 3 hours, as still as if they were at prayer, watching one woman eat. He records it with a foreigner's bafflement, and does not say what everybody in that hall knew, which is that the woman on the golden chair was the daughter of a Northamptonshire knight, and that the ceremonial was not vanity, but armour. Each kneeling duchess was there to answer, in advance and without words, the sneer that had followed Elizabeth since the day her marriage was announced. A queen made by ritual cannot be unmade by whispering. The hush in that hall at Reading was the loudest argument she ever made. And she made it by saying nothing at all. That is the world these ladies operate in. To serve at such a table is to be an instrument in an argument about who is real, and it explains something you will notice on your very first evening, which is that their mistress is never touched casually, never approached from behind, never spoken to before she speaks, that a lady serves her drink on one knee and takes the cup back the same way, and that the ladies of highest birth compete for the right to do it. Your joints will hurt. There is a way of getting down and up in a heavy gown that the older women will teach you in an hour, and your body will take a year to learn. And there is a way of standing motionless for a very long time, weight shifting invisibly from one foot to the other, that you will still be able to do when you are 80. And then, into the middle of all this frozen protocol, at some unannounced hour, comes the king. Even the sound of his arrival is different. The doors, the boots, the laughter arriving before the man, and all the women in that chamber go down like wheat as Edward IV walks into his wife's rooms and tells them all, cheerfully, to get up. You will not be prepared for him either. He is 30 in this year, and still the handsomest man anybody in the room has seen. 6 feet 4 inches in a country of men, a foot shorter, broad, golden brown, with an easy public warmth that no rank protects you from. He remembers the names of the chamberers. He will remember yours. He is the most charming man in England, and he is also, though it is not yet written on him, beginning to run to fat and to drink too much and to eat as a project. He has a soldier's record nobody can argue with, having never lost a battle in his life. He has a brain for money and trade that surprises merchants who expect a warrior. He also has a habit that everybody in this room manages around, which is that he takes his pleasure where he finds it, in the city, at court, among the wives of London, and does not trouble to conceal it. And the ladies of the chamber see the Queen's face when word of a new one comes in, and see it for a quarter of a second, and then it is gone. Watch the two of them together. This is the thing the chroniclers, who mostly loathed her, could not fit into the story. They quarrel. They make it up. He gives her extravagant presents. She gives him so far 3 living daughters, and the son born in the dark, and will give him more. He never sets her aside, never humiliates her publicly, never once lets another woman near the rank of queen. And she, who could ruin the peace of England any week she chose by making a scene, never makes one. She has decided what she wants, which is that boy in the cradle on the throne of England, and to have it she will endure a great deal, and she has the strongest nerve of anybody in the room, including the man who won Barnet in the fog. When he goes, the chamber lets its breath out, and Elizabeth picks up her needle, and the reading resumes at the line it stopped at, and one of her sisters says something under her breath that startles a laugh out of her, briefly, like a girl, and that is the only time all day that anybody will hear it. Now look about you at the ladies again, while the moment is still warm. What none of them can say, and all of them are thinking, is that the king's good health is the roof over all their heads. Their mistress is a knight's daughter with an army of enemies. Her son is an infant, and the entire structure of their lives, the fees, the liveries, the beeswax candles, the deference, all of it rests upon one enormous, golden, hard-living man, who is 30 years old and who eats and drinks like a man who believes he will live forever. He will be dead in 11 years, at 40. And on the day that news comes, everything in this chamber, each woman, each alliance, each careful silence, will be worth precisely nothing, and they will find out what they are made of. They do not know that yet. Nobody does. They are laughing at that whispered joke, and the fire is warm, and outside the shutters the Thames is running black and patient in the dark, and there is nothing at all wrong with any of it. and there will not be. For another 11 years, to live in this chamber, you must learn the map of the court, and it is not drawn on parchment, and nobody will explain it to you. And if you get it wrong, you will destroy your family. So let me draw it for you now, quietly, while the ladies sew. There are 3 powers at Edward's court, and they hate one another with the exhausted, patient hatred of people who must dine together. First, the Queen's kin, the Woodvilles, and the Queen's sons by her first husband. They hold no great ancient earldoms, but they hold the Queen, the heir, the offices, and the marriages. And above all, they hold the future. Because the infant prince will be raised by his uncle, Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers, her own brother, who is the most interesting man at this court by a distance. He is a jouster of European fame, a crusader, a pilgrim, who has been to Compostela, a translator of philosophy, and a serious enough man of letters that in a few years the first book printed on English soil will be a translation of his, a volume of sayings of the philosophers, put through the press of the merchant Caxton by an earl who spends his mornings in the tilt yard. He wears a hair shirt under the silk. When the king's son grows to a man he will be, in every particular, the work of that uncle. Remember him. When the storm comes, he is the first man they kill. Second, the king's oldest friends and companions in arms, and chief of them William Hastings, the chamberlain, who has been at Edward's side since the beginning, who shares his drinking and his hunting and his women, and who cordially detests the Woodvilles for stealing the intimacy that should be his. Hastings and Rivers loathe one another. Both love the king. That is the fault line. And third, the king's own blood. George, Duke of Clarence, is the middle of the 3 and the family's disaster, a beautiful, plausible, greedy, unstable man who has already betrayed Edward once, joining Warwick's rebellion, marrying Warwick's daughter, and coming within a hand's breadth of taking the throne. Who was forgiven? And who is in the very year you have arrived, sulking and scheming again over an inheritance he cannot get? He is a man who cannot be satisfied and cannot be trusted. And the Queen watches him the way you watch a dog you do not know. 6 winters from now his brother will finally have him put to death, privately, in the Tower. And England will tell itself for centuries that it was done in a butt of wine. And Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the youngest, is the one you should look at longest, because you would never pick him out. He is 19 or 20 at present, small, slight, dark-haired where his kin are golden, quiet in a court of loud men, ferociously loyal to Edward, and just now beginning to govern the north of England, which will come to love him. He has a bad back that troubles him, and that nobody at this court mentions. He and the Queen are civil, and there is no warmth in it whatsoever. He thinks her family are upstarts. She thinks him cold. Neither of them is entirely wrong, and 11 years from tonight, when the king is dead and her son is 12, this quiet young man will take the boy into his keeping on the road from Ludlow and arrest Anthony Woodville, and the Queen will run for sanctuary again with her daughters, and Richard will be crowned. And the 2 boys will be seen at their windows in the Tower, and then less often, and then not at all, and the rest is the most argued over silence in English history. I am not going to tell you what happened to them, because nobody knows, and everybody who tells you they know is selling something. What I want you to hold is that the ladies in this chamber tonight, sewing and laughing, will live through it. They are in the room when the news comes. They pack the Queen's coffers by torchlight for the second sanctuary. That is the true, hard privilege of their service. They were there for the whole of it, and they told nobody, and they died old with it inside them. Come out of the fire for a moment, though. Come and look at the children. The nursery is not far, and it has its own establishment. its own lady mistress, rockers for the cradle, wet nurses whose diet is regulated as strictly as a racehorse's, and a household of its own. There are 3 little girls in the year we are visiting. Elizabeth is 6, the eldest, a grave fair child, who is already spoken of in treaties, and who will one day be the mother of a dynasty and the grandmother of a queen whose reign a great many of the people listening to me will have heard of. Mary is 4, Cecily is 3. And in his cradle is the prince, still a baby, who will be sent away west to Ludlow to be raised as the Prince of Wales in his own court, because that is what is done, and his mother will see him rarely, and will write to him, and will worry about him, and will not be with him at the end. Watch the Queen with them, because this is the only place the mask comes off entirely, and the ladies have all seen it, and none of them will ever describe it to anybody. She has the 4-year-old on her lap, and the child is pulling at the pearls on her bodice, and she is letting her. She examines the baby the way any mother in any century examines a baby, minutely, professionally. She asks the wet nurse questions. She holds him against her shoulder while she goes on discussing, over his head, in an even voice, the terms of a Kentish wardship with her chamberlain. That is what the ladies see. That is the woman they serve. And it is why some of them will follow her into sanctuary a second time, when she has no money left to pay them and every reason in the world to be abandoned. Not because she is kind, exactly, because she is theirs. The Queen will lose her son long before she loses him, and the losing is written down in ordinances in a fair clerkly hand, and everybody in this chamber has heard them discussed. When the prince is 3, he will be sent to Ludlow on the Welsh March to hold his own court as Prince of Wales, and to be brought up. This is not cruelty, and nobody in this century would think it so. An heir raised at his father's court is a courtier. An heir raised in his own household learns to be served, to hear petitions, to keep a council, to govern a country in miniature before he must govern one in earnest. His household will be headed by his mother's brother, Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers, and his governance set out in rules that survive, and I want to give them to you, because they are one of the most touching documents this century produced. The child shall rise at a convenient hour according to his age. He shall say his matins. He shall hear mass in his chapel, and not in his chamber. At dinner there shall be recited before him noble stories of virtue and honour, and no unclean word or tale shall be spoken in his hearing by any man, on pain of dismissal. After meat he shall be occupied with learning and with such disports as behoove his estate. He shall have his exercise on horseback. At evensong he shall be brought to his chapel, and the doors shall be shut at 8 o'clock, and no man shall come or go after, and his attendants shall watch beside him while he sleeps. The ordinances go out in the king's name, and a mother's hand is visible in every line of them, who is to be near him, what he may hear when the doors are locked. She saw him rarely after that. There were long roads and a court that moved, and a kingdom to be governed. And she wrote to him, and he wrote back in a schoolboy's careful hand, and he grew up polished, lettered, devout, a serious boy, by every account a credit to the man who made him. He was 12 when they told him his father was dead, and he was king. He rode out from Ludlow toward London with his uncle Anthony to be crowned, and the party was met on the road at Stony Stratford by the quiet Duke. His father's brother and Anthony was arrested at supper and taken north, and the boy wept and said that Rivers was a good man and was told he did not understand, and rode on to London with a different escort. He was lodged in the Tower, which is where kings lodge before a coronation, and there was nothing sinister in it. His little brother joined him, and nobody who was not a party to it has ever known what happened next. That is the infant asleep along the passage tonight. The ordinances are dated, and you could go and look at them. Somebody in this household will one day have to explain to his mother that the doors were shut at 8 o'clock, exactly as she asked, and that it made no difference at all. There is a room off her private chambers where 4 men sit at a table covered with a green cloth, and there are rolls of parchment on it, and one of them is arguing about a mill in Northamptonshire. This is the Queen's Council, and if you want to know why a lady-in-waiting is worth cultivating, this room is the reason. A consort of England is not a decorative wife with an allowance. She is a landowner on a scale hardly anybody else in the kingdom approaches. At her marriage, she was endowed with lands, manors, boroughs, fee farms, the customs of certain ports, and the profits of certain justice. A sprawling estate spread across a dozen counties, worth something like £4,000 in a year, when a knight lives well on 100, and it is hers, not the king's. She administers it through her own council of lawyers and clerks and receivers. She appoints the stewards and the bailiffs. She grants the offices. She keeps the courts, and when a tenant will not pay, she sues him. Watch how she works. She is meticulous. She takes advice from lawyers and takes it seriously. She is very difficult about money, and there are men in England who found that out expensively. There is a story, which I give you as it comes, of a dispute with a mighty lord over a manor, in which the Queen quietly bought up the reversion behind his back and had him in a corner before he knew there was a corner. She provided for her sons and her brothers out of these revenues. She paid for a Cambridge college out of and when the world fell in and she was in sanctuary with nothing, it was these estates seized from her that she spent the rest of her life trying to get back, because in this century land is not wealth, land is existence. And a woman without it has no shelter and no voice and no way to reward the people who stayed. Consider now what that means for the 7 women sewing in the next room. Their mistress can appoint a bailiff, grant a lease, present a priest to a living, arrange a wardship, and drop a word to the king. Each of those is a favour worth years of a family's income to somebody. She has, in effect, a purse of patronage, and the only route to it lies through the ring of women who are with her, from the moment she wakes to the moment the curtains are drawn. This is the whole economy of the chamber, and I want you to see it clearly, because the romantic picture of the lady-in-waiting, the pretty girl with a fan, is not merely wrong. It inverts the truth. These women are the doorkeepers of an enormous business. They are not decorating power. They are standing in the only corridor that leads to it. Half the gentry of England is writing to them, and the Queen knows precisely what is being asked of each of them, and by whom, and at what price, because she has been a poor widow petitioning a king for her son's inheritance under an oak tree. And there is nothing about the trade in favours that she needs explained. 2 afternoons in a week, the doors of the Chamber of Presence are opened, and the Queen goes out to be looked at, and you will go with her. And this is the part of the work that nobody who has not done it can imagine. The room is arranged before she comes. The cloth of estate, a canopy of embroidered silk, hangs over the chair on its low dais, and the cushions are placed, and the ushers have set the rails, and the household stands in a hollow square by rank. Then the Queen enters, and everybody goes down, and she crosses to the chair, and sits, and does not move again for 2 hours. That is the office. Not to speak, particularly, and not to act. To be present, visibly, in one place, while the kingdom comes past and looks at her. An abbot with a petition about a fish weir, a knight of Yorkshire whose son wants a place, a Genoese merchant with a letter from a bank, the mayor of a town in her own dower, lands, who has practised his speech for a fortnight and forgets it, 2 lawyers of her council with a case she must decide, an ambassador who is here to look at nothing else and will write it all down. And you stand behind her chair for 2 hours, and it will be the hardest thing you have done in your life. Standing is a skill. You will learn where to put your weight and how to lock nothing and how to breathe. Your headdress weighs what it weighs. Your gown is heavier still. You may not lean on anything or shift your feet audibly or look at anybody in the eye or scratch or yawn or, God forbid, sneeze. And above all, you may not, at any moment, let your face say what you think of the man now speaking, because everybody is looking at your face. That is the second thing nobody imagines. The Queen's own face is a wall by long training, so the men of this court, who cannot get inside the chamber, watch the women who can. They will study a lady's mouth for what the Queen thought of a petition. They will notice which of you was sent out before a certain matter was raised. A foreign ambassador in this decade wrote home, quite seriously, about the demeanour of the women behind the chair. You are not scenery. You are being interrogated, silently, for 2 hours, by everybody present, and the only way to win is to be perfectly, blandly, unreadably pleasant, and then to remember all of it, every man who came, and in what order, and who spoke to whom in the doorway on the way out, and to report it in the privy chamber afterward while your feet come back to life. And when it is over, and the doors close, the Queen will stand, and roll her head once, and say something so dry about the mayor of that town that 2 of you have to leave the room. There is one word that is never said aloud in this chamber, and you will learn it by the way the air changes when somebody outside these walls comes close to saying it. 3 years ago, when Warwick had the king in his keeping, and the Woodville men were dead, a man was got to swear a deposition that the Queen's mother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, Duchess of Bedford, had made images of lead, bound with wire, to work upon the king and force him to the marriage. The charge was sorcery. It was brought before the council. Jacquetta, who was in her 50s and had buried a duke and outlived a rebellion, did not weep or fly. She petitioned the mayor and aldermen of London, whom she had once helped, to testify to her good name. And she demanded that the case be heard, and it was heard, and it collapsed, and she was formally cleared. The man who swore it fled. The council wrote her innocence into the record, and it did no good at all, because a charge like that does not need to be proved. It needs only to be made. Understand what the accusation was for. Elizabeth's marriage was the scandal of the age, and it had no rational explanation that flattered the king. Either the most eligible man in Europe had thrown away his diplomatic value for love of a penniless widow, 5 years his senior, which made him a fool, or he had been compelled. Sorcery explained everything. It saved Edward's dignity, it destroyed Elizabeth's legitimacy, and it required no evidence beyond the fact that a princely house had a legend about a water fairy in its ancestry, which the city of London had cheerfully applauded at her coronation. Everything charming became sinister overnight. Nor is it over. 12 years from now, when the king is dead and men are moving against her family, the charge will be raised again, and this time in a parliament, and it will be said that the Queen and her mother enchanted the king into the marriage, and it will be one of the props on which the argument that her sons are not lawful is built. Sorcery is the accusation that does not die. It cannot be disproved. And it is used in this century and for 2 centuries after, overwhelmingly against women, and most often against women who have power that men cannot account for. So the chamber does not speak of it, and the ladies watch strangers for any hint of it, and when a preacher at Paul's Cross touches on the sins of enchantment, somebody will carry it in before the Queen has finished her dinner. They know, all of them, that this is the blade held permanently at Elizabeth's throat. Any of them, if she were bought or frightened, could swear a deposition. That is what a deposition is, one woman sworn, saying. And the saying of a woman from this chamber would be worth a fortune. And that is the last turn of the screw on the discretion they live by. It is not merely that a loose tongue would embarrass the Queen. It is that in this world, a few sentences from a woman who was in the room can be shaped into witchcraft, and witchcraft can unmake a marriage, and unmaking a marriage can bastardize a prince, and bastardizing a prince can lose a kingdom. Each of these women is carrying a weapon. She can never put down. Look at them now, laughing in the firelight, and then look at the Queen, who has heard it all her married life, and who founded a college and paid for masses and walked barefoot to an anointing, and who knows, exactly and always, that none of it will ever be quite enough. There is a woman living in England this spring who wore the crown of England for 24 years, and whom nobody in the chamber ever mentions. And if you say her name at the wrong moment, the room will go quiet as a stopped clock. Margaret of Anjou is being kept in honourable custody. She was a French princess brought over at 15 to marry a gentle, holy, hopeless king. She governed for him when his mind failed. She raised armies for him. She fought this war for 20 years, together with a ferocity that made her the most hated woman in England, and she was called She-Wolf, and worse, and all the crimes of the age were laid at her door, and some of them were hers. Last year at Tewkesbury, her army was destroyed, and her only son, a boy of 17, was killed. Her husband died in the Tower within the month. She was carried in a cart through London behind the victor, and then imprisoned, and she is now in the keeping of an old friend who is paid a small allowance for her food, and she has nothing else. And before long the King of France will buy her back like a piece of furniture, and she will die in poverty in Anjou and be almost forgotten. Elizabeth Woodville's own husband was killed fighting for that woman. Elizabeth's first marriage was Lancastrian. Her father-in-law's house wore Margaret's colours, and the Queen you serve is now the wife of the man who destroyed her, and sits in the rooms Margaret furnished. And her ladies sew in a chamber where Margaret's ladies sewed, and some of the older women in this household serve them both. And will not say so. Hold that in your mind a while. It is the single most useful thing I can leave you with about this world. Each arrangement in it is provisional. The woman in the golden chair with the duchesses on their knees was a country widow 8 years ago, and the woman in the cart was crowned in the abbey with the same anointing. There is one turn of a wheel between them, and nothing else, and both of them know it, and the ladies of that chamber know it too. And that knowledge is the reason for the vigilance, and for the discretion, and for the laughter in the dark. They have already seen a queen brought down. They will see another. They will help her pack. Now step outside with me for a moment into the cold, because the palace has a neighbour. And until you have understood the neighbour, you have not understood anything about the Queen's life, or her lady's terror, or the night they all ran. Westminster Abbey stands at the palace's shoulder. It has been building for 200 years and is not finished. The western end is a stump with the old Norman nave still attached, and another 60 winters must pass before the last of it is done. Inside, behind the high altar, is the reason the whole thing exists, the shrine of St. Edward the Confessor, the sainted king who founded the church, whose bones lie in a tomb of Italian mosaic that pilgrims still crawl into the niches of to be nearer to him. Around him the kings of England are buried, and the queens in painted tombs with their effigies looking at the vault, and there are boys with brooms sweeping the pilgrims' dust off them. This is a Benedictine house, with an abbot who is one of the great men of the kingdom, and monks who have been rising in the black of the morning to sing the offices, generation after generation, since before the conquest. Their bells govern the palace next door. When the Queen's ladies wake, they wake to the abbey. When the Queen sleeps, monks are singing on the other side of that wall. And the abbey has a precinct, and the precinct is sanctuary. The law is ancient, and it is respected because everybody believes it is God's law and not the king's. A man who has committed a felony, a debtor whose creditors are at his heels, a soldier from the losing side of a battle with the winners in the street behind him, may run for the abbey, and if he reaches consecrated ground, he cannot be taken. To drag him out is sacrilege, and men have been excommunicated for it, and kings have hesitated at that door. Westminster's sanctuary is the most famous in England, and it has its own buildings, and there lives inside it a whole permanent population of the desperate and the guilty and the merely ruined, thieves, forgers, men who killed a neighbour in a quarrel, bankrupts, and among them, at two separate moments in her life, the anointed Queen of England. Think what that means about the 15th century. There is a strip of ground a stone's throw from the throne where the king's writ does not run. It is the safety valve of a violent society, a place to which even the highest may flee, and it exists because faith is stronger, just, than power. It is not comfortable, it is crowded, and it smells, and the food comes in charity. And it saved the woman in that chamber, and her daughters, and the boy in the cradle, and it will save her again. And there is no version of the Tudor dynasty that exists without those buildings. Because if the Abbot of Westminster had shut his gate on a frightened pregnant woman in the October of the Great Fall, there is no Elizabeth of York, and no Henry VIII, and no Elizabeth I, and no England anybody now living would recognise. The ladies of the chamber know the way. That is the last thing to tell you tonight, and it is the coldest. In a household like this one, in a century like this one, every woman in that room has thought more than once about how many minutes it takes to reach the abbey door from the Queen's stair, and which coffer she would carry, and whether the tide would be with them. They have not spoken of it, but when the night comes, 11 years from now, and the word arrives that the king is dead, nobody in that chamber will need to be told what to do. They have all rehearsed it in the dark, lying on their pallets, listening to the monks sing on the other side of the wall. 2 miles downriver from the palace door is the loudest, richest, dirtiest, most self-satisfied city in England. And although you will seldom go into it, London runs through the Queen's chamber all day long, like a draught under a door. It has perhaps 50,000 souls inside its wall, which is a wall the Romans built and the citizens keep mended, with 7 gates that are shut at curfew. It has a bridge with houses on it and a chapel in the middle and heads on poles at the southern end. And beneath the bridge, the tide roars through the narrow arches so hard that watermen shoot it for a wager and drown for it regularly. It has 100 parish churches, so that the bells on a feast morning are not a sound but a weather. It has streets named for what is sold there, and you can smell each of them coming. Bread Street, Milk Street, Poultry, the shambles where the butchers work, and the kites hang overhead like grey rags. And it is governed by men in gowns who bow to the Queen and lend to the King and know exactly what he owes them. Those men are the ones you will actually deal with. A royal household buys constantly, and the mercers and grocers and goldsmiths of London come up the river to Westminster with their wares under cloth, and are admitted, and unroll a bolt of Genoa velvet across the chamber floor, while 8 women look at it and say nothing and think very hard about the price. Elizabeth's wardrobe accounts survive here and there, and you can look through them and watch her, 5 centuries later, buying and see what she chose. Nobody in the room forgets that the mercer bowing over the velvet has more ready money than most of the earls of England. And in these very years, something is happening in this city that will outlast everything else in this story. A Kentish merchant, named William Caxton, who has spent his life in the cloth trade in Bruges and has fallen to translating French romances into English for want of better occupation, has learned a new German craft. He prints them by machine, from movable type. He has done it abroad. Her brother Rivers has already put work his way. And in a year or two, Caxton will come home and set up his press in the Abbey precinct at Westminster, within a few hundred paces of the room where you sleep, in the shadow of the sanctuary that once hid your queen. And from that shed will come the first printing done in England, and among its earliest books, a translation made by her own brother. Nobody in the chamber understands what this is. Why would they? It looks like a cheaper way of copying. The ladies with their painted books of hours, made by hand for one owner and worth a farm, will die without ever suspecting that a machine in a shed by the Abbey has just ended the world in which the powerful could control what ordinary people were allowed to know, and that 4 centuries of consequences are already loaded and cocked, and that among them will be the printed pamphlets that make a saint of one man in this story and a monster of another, and that decide, long after every woman in this chamber is dust, what history will say about them all. And now you must hear what is being said about your mistress in the streets and the taverns, because the chamber hears it, and the hearing is part of the service. News in this kingdom moves through certain organs, and everybody knows them. There is the nave of Paul's Cathedral, called Paul's Walk, where men go to hear and to be heard, and where a lie can be started before dinner, and be in Bristol by Sunday. There is the pulpit, and the open-air pulpit at Paul's Cross above all, where the government preaches its case, and when the government changes, unpreaches it. There are the alehouses. There are the ballads, sung by men with a sheet in their hand, and the bills, nailed to church doors in the night, in rhyme, and always anonymous, and the writing of them is a hanging matter, and they are everywhere. And the ballads say this, that the king was bewitched, that the queen's mother made images in wax, that the Woodvilles are upstarts who have eaten England's inheritance, and married the heiresses of England, and got their brother made an earl, that the queen is proud, and grasping, and cold, that she keeps the king from his true counsellors, that she smiles at nobody. Some of it is scurrilous, some of it is politics, and a great deal of it is simply the sound a country makes when a knight's daughter goes before the duchesses. It comes into the chamber, through the servants, through a chaplain, through a lady's brother, who heard it in the cathedral nave, and cannot decide whether to repeat it. And when it is repeated, the queen listens with no expression whatever, and says, "Thank you," and goes on with her needle. What is she to do? She cannot answer a rhyme nailed to a door. She cannot go into the city and explain that she was not proud. She was terrified. That the marriages were made because she had 12 brothers and sisters and no land. That she is grasping because everything she has can be taken from her in an afternoon, and has been, once, and will be again. Any defence would be an admission that the charge deserved answering. So she does the only thing that has ever worked, which is ceremony. She walks barefoot to an anointing. She eats in silence on a golden chair. She gives alms at a chapel door each morning of her life. She founds a college. And she lets the ritual say what she is not permitted to say. And here is the thing that ought to be said plainly, because 500 years have not been kind to her either. Almost everything written about Elizabeth Woodville was written by men who had a reason. The chroniclers of the next reign needed her marriage to be invalid. The Tudor writers needed her to be a tragic mother and nothing else. The historians of later centuries believed the chroniclers, and she is still, today, described in words the ladies of this chamber would not recognize: cold, calculating, ambitious, unloving, when what they saw was a woman who prayed at dawn, laughed at midnight, buried her mother in the spring, and never once in the worst years of her life let anybody outside that room see her afraid. Nobody in the chamber will correct the record, because they have sworn not to. That is the last and the strangest cost of the secret world. The women who knew the truth about her were the only women in England forbidden to tell it. And so the story was written by everybody else. Do not grow attached to this room, because you will not be in it long. And one of the first shocks of service is discovering that a medieval court is not a place at all. It is a caravan that occasionally rests. Within a month of your swearing, a decision will be taken somewhere above your head, and a groom will chalk a mark on a door, and the whole apparatus of the Queen's household will come apart into carts and coffers and be somewhere else. The reasons are practical, and they are not romantic. A palace with 400 people in it fouls itself. The drains, the middens, the stables, the sheer daily tonnage of what several hundred bodies and 100 horses leave behind, defeats even a household of this size, and so the court moves, and while it is gone, the place is scoured, the rushes burnt, the privies emptied, the hangings beaten and aired, and a building that had begun to stink is made sweet again. It moves also because the food runs out. A great household eats through a district. The fish ponds are fished, the game is thinned, the local farms have sold everything they have. Better to go and eat somewhere else and let this country recover. And it moves for the plainest reason of all, which is that rule in this century is a thing done with the face. Lands unvisited are lands half obedient. Sheen, Windsor, Greenwich, Eltham, the manors of the Queen's own dower, they must all see her. And the road between them is where a good deal of the actual governing happens. So, the remove. It begins 2 days out with the clerk of the wardrobe and his roll. The hangings come down off the walls, and this is why nothing in a medieval room is fixed, why the tapestries hang from hooks and the beds unbolt and the trestles fold, because the room is designed to become luggage. The great bed goes in pieces, the tester and the curtains folded into a chest of their own. The plate is counted into iron-bound coffers, and locked and sealed, and the keys go on the chamberlain's belt. The chapel goes, altar cloths, the portable altar, the vessels, the relics wrapped in silk. The kitchen goes, the spits and the cauldrons and the mortars, and the spicery in its locked box with the clerk beside it. Beds, boards, cushions, the Queen's close stool with its velvet seat, the caged bird, the dogs, the coffer of jewels, never out of sight of the woman who keeps its key, the little painted books, and then the ladies, who go by barge if the road runs by water, and it usually does, because the Thames is the true highway of this kingdom, and every palace of any consequence is built with its feet in it. Her barge is a beautiful object, long and low, rowed by liveried men, with a covered cabin in the stern, hung with cloth and cushioned, and a canopy, and her arms painted on the side, so that any waterman within half a mile knows who is passing. You will sit under that canopy with the other gentlewomen, and the oars will find their rhythm, and the palace will slide away behind you. Nothing in this life is better than that. The river is broad and brown and busy, swans everywhere, disdainful, the banks going by, orchards, marsh, the odd huddle of houses, a heron standing in the shallows with the patience of an official. And then the great houses of bishops, with their own stairs and their own gardens running down to the water, and the sound, coming across half a mile of tide, of London bells. In summer there is music in the barge, because somebody has brought a lute. In winter you are wrapped to the eyes in furs, and there is a brazier, and the river is the colour of iron, and your hands ache. Either way, for 2 hours or 6. Nobody can reach the Queen. No petitioners, no ambassadors, no brothers-in-law, just the tide, and women, and the oars going over. She is different afloat. Everybody who serves her notices it. She talks more. She watches the bank. And when the barge comes at last around a bend, and the new palace stands up out of its meadows, with its windows catching the last of the light, and the ladies begin gathering up cloaks and coffers, you will find that you have started, without deciding to feel at home, not in any building, because you have no building, but in the barge, in the company, in the ring of women that goes wherever she goes. That is what a household is. It is not the walls, it is the people who pack them up and carry them. Let us leave the black cloth behind, because in June the court will move upriver, and I want to give you a summer before we end. The palaces she loves best are the ones outside London. Sheen, which stands in a bend of the Thames with meadows running down to the water. Windsor, where the great chapel is being built and the court hunts in the forest. Greenwich, which is called Placentia, the pleasant place, and which the Queen holds as part of her own dower, and where she is not a guest, but the owner, and where she has had the garden laid out as she wants it. Eltham, where the household spends Christmas. And her own manors, the string of them across a dozen counties, where the stewards nail up the arms and the village turns out to see the barge. In summer, service becomes something else entirely. Half the day is spent out of doors. The ladies walk in the gardens, which are square, hedged, gravelled, planted with roses and gillyflowers and rosemary and lavender, with turfed seats and a fountain and vines on a frame for shade. And it is here, not in the chamber, that the private conversations happen. Two women walking a gravel path with their heads together, watched by everybody and heard by nobody. Which is precisely why the paths are the length they are. They go out on the river in the evening. They ride astride or on the little padded sideways saddles that are new in this generation. They watch the archery and shoot, some of them, with a light bow. And they hawk. Falconry is the sport a woman of rank practices on precisely the same terms as a man, and there are ladies in this chamber who are formidable at it. The birds live in the mews with a falconer whose fingers are scarred to the bone. There is an order of precedence among the hawks as exact as the order of the hall. The gerfalcon for a king, the peregrine for an earl, the goshawk for a yeoman, the merlin for a lady, and the merlin, small, ferocious, quick as a thrown knife, is flown at larks over the water meadows on a summer morning, while the mist is still lying in the hollows. Picture the Queen on a bay horse in the wet grass at 7 in the morning, with her hair covered against the dew, and a merlin sitting hooded on her fist, and her sister beside her, and the ladies and the falconer and the boys with the lures, and the sun coming up out of Kent, and the hood is slipped, and the bird goes up, and every face in that meadow turns upward, and for perhaps 40 seconds, nobody in England is a queen or a witch's daughter or a knight's child raised too high. And there is only a small brown bird climbing the light and the sound of 100 larks going up in fear all across the field. That is the other half of what these women's lives were, and no chronicler wrote it down, because chroniclers were not invited. The chamber was not only vigilance, there were mornings like that one, a great many of them, and afterward, a breakfast on the grass and the ride home through a village that came out to look. And when the ladies of that chamber were old, and the king was dead, and the prince is gone, and the whole world they served swept away by the men who came after, it was the mornings they remembered, and the hawk going up, and how young they had all been, and how the light came off the river. Some day in your first summer there will be a joust, and the chamber will talk of nothing else for a fortnight, and I want you to see it from where you will be sitting, which is not with the men. Understand first that a tournament of this generation is a piece of theatre with real blood in it, staged for weeks, licensed by the king, argued over in advance by heralds who settle the terms with the gravity of ambassadors. The greatest of them all took place 5 years ago at Smithfield, when the Queen's brother, Anthony Woodville, Lord Scales, fought the Bastard of Burgundy over 3 days before the assembled court. And it began, as these things did, with a woman. The story is that the ladies of the Queen's chamber came to Anthony after Mass, and tied about his thigh a band of gold with a jewelled letter, and put in his cap a roll of parchment sealed with the Queen's seal, and it was a challenge to be carried to a knight of another realm. That is the fiction. The fact is that the affair had been arranged from the first as a piece of foreign policy to knit England to Burgundy, and that everybody knew it. And that the ladies played their part beautifully, because the pageantry is the point. Chivalry is what this century does, instead of admitting to diplomacy. So, the day. The lists are enclosed with rails and sanded. There are stands hung with cloth. And the Queen sits under a canopy with her women banked about her in their colours, and it is the loveliest thing in England to look at, and everybody knows it, and every knight who rides past salutes that stand and not the king's. The heralds cry the names, the horses come out mad with excitement, barded in the colours of houses, and the men are inside 100 weight of steel and can hardly turn their heads, and the lances are of poplar, and they shatter. And that is the point of poplar. You will be surprised by the noise, which is not cheering, but a sort of shocked collective grunt at the moment of impact, and by the smell of horse and dust, and by how fast it is. A knight is unhorsed and lies still for a moment that goes on too long, and every woman around you stops breathing. And then he moves. Anthony Woodville's mount killed the bastard's horse by accident, and the second day was fought on foot with axes, and the king threw down his baton to stop it, because a man was going to die. And the ladies give the favours, and take them back, and judge the prize, and give it, and it is a jewel, and it is worth a great deal, and it is worth nothing at all compared to being the man who kneels in front of that stand. Watch the Queen, watching her brother. He is the best of them, and the age knows it, and the age is delighted by him. Crusader, pilgrim, philosopher, jouster, the man who wears a hair shirt beneath the armour, and who will kneel to receive a prize from his sister, with the whole of Europe applauding. 16 years from now, he will be taken from the road at Stony Stratford and held in a castle in the north, and he will write a poem there, a short one, plain and steady, about the turning of fortune and the shortness of everything. And then he will be taken out one morning and beheaded without trial on the word of the quiet young duke who is standing in this tilt yard today, 30 feet from where you sit, applauding him. That is the century. Nothing about it is simple, least of all the beautiful parts. Come with me to the wardrobe, which is not a cupboard, but a department, occupying rooms of its own with a clerk and a locked door, and understand that what is stored there is not clothing. It is capital. The presses hold the gowns. Laid flat with sprigs of wormwood and lavender against the moth, wrapped in linen, listed on a roll, cloth of gold, which is exactly what it sounds like. Silk shot through with gold-wrapped thread so that it stands away from the body and rustles like dry leaves and is heavy enough to bruise a shoulder. A single gown of it can cost the annual income of a knight. Velvet from Genoa. Damask, satin, camlet, russet for the country. There are furs in their own chest, with their own inventory, ermine and sable, and lettuce and miniver, some of them older than the Queen, and recut for a third gown. There are the little sumptuary laws printed on the whole arrangement like veins in marble, which say precisely which cloth and which fur belong to which rank, so that a mercer's wife who buys velvet is not merely vulgar, but a lawbreaker, and everybody in England can be identified at 50 paces by what they are permitted to wear. The Queen's jewels live nearer, in a coffer with a lady who keeps the key and answers for it. Gold collars and enamelled badges, a girdle of gold plaques, brooches, rosaries of coral and jet, pearls in ropes and pearls sewn on things, rings, and among them the pieces with names, given at coronations and christenings, pledged and redeemed and given again. Because the crucial fact about all of this, which no painting will ever tell you, is that it is liquid. Jewels are the Queen's reserve. They can be pawned in an afternoon to Italian bankers in London, and redeemed when the rents come in. Twice in her life this queen will find that the ropes of pearls in that coffer are the only thing standing between her household and hunger, and she will spend them without a flicker. And the ladies wear the queen's gifts, and are dressed by her. And here is where you learn what a livery really means. Twice a year the cloth is given out, murrey and blue, so many yards for a gentlewoman, and fewer for a chamberer, and a tailor comes, and the whole chamber is measured, and for perhaps 3 weeks the room is a workshop, and everybody is stitching. When the court appears in public, at a crown-wearing, at a joust, at the abbey on a feast day, the queen goes down the water stairs into her barge, with 20 women behind her, all dressed in her colours. And the effect is the whole point, and it is beautiful, and it is a display of power. She is not a woman with attendants. She is a woman with a following. And the following can be seen from the far bank. Now let me tell you what they did for pleasure, because the histories give the impression that these lives were unbroken solemnity, and they were not. They played in that chamber, at tables, and at chess, and at cards. And cards are the novelty of this generation, come recently out of Germany and France. And the Queen has a reputation for playing very well and very tightly and for winning. They gambled all of it and kept accounts. They danced, and the dances are formal and processional, danced in a line or a circle, to a pipe and a tabor or a small consort of viols. And everyone at this court can dance, because it is the most public thing a body does, and the court studies a body the way it studies a coat of arms. There was music constantly. The Chapel Royal keeps the finest singers in Europe, boys and men, and the polyphony of this decade is one of the glories of English art, and in the chamber itself there is the harp and the lute, and somebody sings, and the songs are of love and lost love and the coming of spring, and one of them, in this very generation, is a carol whose tune we still have. The ladies are expected to play something. If you cannot, you will learn. They kept pets, which the age half disapproved of, and her little dogs slept where they liked. They had a caged bird. They had a fool, or the king did, and he came into the chamber and was rude to everybody and got away with it, which was his function. They watched jousts from a stand hung with cloth, and the ladies gave favours to the knights. And the Earl Rivers, the Queen's own brother, was the finest jouster in Europe, and there is no describing the noise of that stand when he rode. They went out in the barge on summer evenings. They hunted with hawks in the meadows on the far bank, and hawking is the one sport a woman of rank pursues on absolutely equal terms with any man. And there are ladies in this chamber who fly a merlin with a skill that would silence a room, and they laughed. That is the thing to hold on to out of all this ceremony and dread. Look through the wills these women left, and the letters that survive from the household world of this century, and what comes through is not gloom, but a level, sardonic, extremely practical humour. The humour of people who work in close quarters and see everything. They mimicked the men. They had names for them. They knew exactly which bishop was pompous, and exactly what the ambassador said when he tripped, and the fire burned low, and somebody imitated somebody. And the Queen of England, who was called cold by everybody who never met her, put her sewing in her lap and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. You will not find that in a chronicle either. Some evening when the Queen is at cards and you are not needed, go down through the passages toward the smell and see the kitchens of Westminster, because they are one of the wonders of England, and no lady of the chamber ever forgets the first sight of them. They are their own building, or nearly, vaulted, blackened, immense. With hearths you could roast a whole ox in, and men whose entire trade is to turn a spit, and who are burnt down one side. The heat is beyond describing. There is a boiling house, and a roasting hearth, and a bakehouse with ovens like the mouths of hills. There is a sorcery, a larder, a poultry, a scullery, a spicery, a confectionery for the sugar work, a buttery for the ale, and a cellar for the wine. There are perhaps 200 men in the food departments alone, and their trade is governed by ordinances written down in a book, and every one of them knows what he may eat, what he may take home, and what will be flogged out of him if he pilfers. Watch the great sequence. The stockpots that never go out. The mortars where two boys pound almonds, because almond milk is the base of half this cookery, and no dairy may be used on the many days when dairy is forbidden. The sauce cook working with vinegar and verjuice, the juice of unripe grapes, because this century wants its food sharp and does not want it sweet where we would. The sweetness goes on the meat instead, with dried fruit and spice, and the result would be strange in your mouth and delicious. Above all, the spices which come from the far side of the earth, through Venice and Genoa and Bruges, and are locked up, pepper and cinnamon, ginger, cloves, mace, cubes, grains of paradise, and saffron, which is worth more than the silver dish it will colour, and which is why so much of what leaves this kitchen is gold. What arrives upstairs is not what you might expect either. Elizabeth eats little and eats carefully. Bread, always the white manchet loaf, wine watered, roast fowl and small birds, larks and plovers, fish on Fridays and Saturdays, and through Lent and Advent, and there are perhaps 140 fast days in her year. And the fish is a whole science. Pike and carp from the stew ponds, salt herring, stockfish, eels, lampreys, which the great of England love beyond reason. There are dishes with names that mean nothing now. Blanc mange, which is a white dish of pounded chicken and almonds and rice. Not a pudding. Frumenty. Mortreuse, a custard tart called a doucette. On feast days there are subtleties, sculptures of sugar and almond paste. A castle, a ship, a saint, carried up between the courses to be admired and demolished. And vegetables barely appear at the Queen's table at all, being thought food for the poor, and fruit is distrusted raw and cooked into everything, and nobody in this kitchen has ever seen a potato, or a tomato, or sugar in any quantity that is not medicine, or tea, or coffee, or chocolate, and the ocean that will bring those things is 20 years from being sailed across. The last thing to understand about this kitchen is who it feeds. Not the woman in the golden chair. Her plate is a rounding error. It feeds the household, hundreds of them, twice a day by rank, in hall so many loaves and so many gallons of ale to a gentlewoman, fewer to a groom. A mess of meat between four. It is written down, it is checked. And when the household has eaten, the almoner's men come for what remains, and it goes out to the gate to the poor of Westminster, in quantities that would astonish you, every single day. That is the machine standing behind the woman in the golden chair, silently, all her life. 200 men in the dark and the heat, so that 6 ladies in a lit room upstairs may kneel with a covered dish and never once think about where it came from. If you serve here long enough, you will see the whole wheel of the year turn in this chamber. And the calendar of a great household is nothing like a modern one. It is a rhythm of fasting and feasting so extreme that the two make each other possible. There is Lent, 40 days of no meat, no eggs, no butter, no cheese. And the kitchens turn to fish and almond milk, and the court grows lean and irritable and pious. There is Advent, another fast. There are the Ember Days, and the Vigils, and the Fish Days of every week, and the sum of it is that for something near half the calendar this household does not eat flesh. And then, over against all that abstinence, the feasts. Easter, with the sepulchre in the chapel and the singing before dawn. Whitsun, the summer bonfires of St. John's Eve. Michaelmas, when the rents come in and the accounts are made up and geese are eaten. All Hallows, when the dead are prayed for by name, and each soul in the household believes the dead are near. And then, at the turning of the year, the 12 nights of Christmas. Christmas at the court of Edward IV is the most extravagant thing in the kingdom, and it begins with the hall dressed in ivy and holly and bay, and all the greenery England can produce in December, and the shutters shut, and the fires enormous, and the wax candles lit by the hundredweight. There is a boar's head brought in with a song. There is a lord of misrule, a servant or a minor gentleman elected to rule the household for the season, who wears a paper crown and orders the grate about and is obeyed. Because for that fortnight the world is turned upside down and everybody agrees to it. There are mummers who come in disguised and dance and speak in rhyme, and one of them is the king, and everybody pretends fervently not to know. There are gifts on New Year's Day, given upward and downward through the household in an exact order that everybody has thought about for weeks. She gives a gown to a lady and a purse to a chamberer, and receives from her lady's gifts. They have gone into debt to buy. There are disguisings, which are the ancestors of the masque, in which the ladies of the chamber dress as goddesses, or as the seasons and process by torchlight through the hall with music, and are admired, and everyone knows exactly who is under which mask, and admires that too. There is dancing nightly. There is gambling on a scale that would frighten you, and it is legal at Christmas and at no other time. And she plays, and she wins. On 12th night, the king wears his crown, and the household eats a cake with a bean in it, and whoever finds the bean is king of that night. And if a scullion finds it, a scullion is served on the knee by an earl. And it is enormously funny, and nobody ever quite forgets that, for one evening, the Order of England was a joke. Then it ends. The green comes down. The Lord of Misrule goes back to being a groom of the pantry and speaks respectfully. The fast days resume, and the court moves, and the year rolls on toward Lent. And you will notice something in your first Christmas in that chamber that will stay with you all your life. Nobody in this household believes life is fair. They have seen too much of it. But for 12 days every winter, they act out a world in which a servant may rule and a king may be laughed at. And then they put it away carefully with the holly, like something too bright to look at for long. And now I must tell you what happens in this chamber in the early summer of the year you arrived, because it is the reason the Queen has been at Westminster and not on progress, and because it is the only time in your service that you will see her weep. Her mother is dying. Jacquetta of Luxembourg, Duchess of Bedford, who married a duke at 17 and a chamberlain for love, who bore 14 children and buried a duke, and then a knight and a son taken out and beheaded on a hill in the north, who was accused of witchcraft and fought the charge to its ruin and won, who stood in a sanctuary lodging and put her hands on her daughter through the pains of a birth that England had no name for, is at the end of her life at somewhere near 56 years old. And when she goes, in the last day of May, she takes with her the only person alive to whom the Queen of England was ever simply somebody's girl. Watch how a chamber grieves. Not loudly, the Queen's mourning is black, and the household goes into black. And the black is the most expensive cloth in the wardrobe. Masses are said and paid for in numbers that would beggar a night. Because in this faith the dead are not gone, but waiting. And every mass is a hand held out to somebody in purgatory. And it is the last practical service a daughter can perform. The chantry priests are endowed, the alms are doubled. And the Queen, who has not wept in front of any of you for a single moment of her life that has contained a husband's exile, a father's execution, and a birth in hiding, sits with her mother's rosary in her hands. The ladies do what women have always done. They keep the room quiet. They bring food that is not eaten. They put the letters aside, all of them, and the petitions, and the wardship. And the man from Kent may wait a week, and he waits. One of them sits up with her. And in the mornings the queen rises, and is dressed, and is pinned, and puts on her face like the rest of her clothes, and goes down to sit beneath the canopy and hear petitions, because that is what she is for. And there is nobody in England to whom she may say otherwise. That is the whole of it, and I want to leave it there, because there is a temptation to make these people either monsters of ambition or saints of suffering. And they were neither. They were a woman of 35 who had lost her mother, and 7 or 8 other women who loved her enough to say nothing about it. Elizabeth will live another 20 years, and she will lose almost everything else. She will keep, until she dies in a house at Bermondsey, with no money, the little book of hours in which her mother's name is written. Now we come to the part that nobody puts in the ballads, and it is the part that makes a lady-in-waiting a person of consequence rather than a decoration. And it is the reason your family bled money to place you here. It is called access, and it is a trade, and you are going to learn it. Consider what a petitioner faces in this kingdom. He wants a wardship, which is the right to administer the lands of an orphaned heir, and to arrange that heir's marriage, and a good wardship is a fortune. Or he wants a license, a pardon, a bishop's favour, an appointment for a nephew, an end to a lawsuit that has eaten his family for a decade. He may go through the courts, which are slow and cost more than the thing is worth. Or he may find somebody near the fountainhead. The Queen has her own council, her own lands, her own vast income, drawn from manors from Cornwall to the north. And she disposes of the offices upon them. And she has, more valuable still, the ear of the man who disposes of everything else. So a letter is written to a lady of the chamber, and it is a marvel of construction. It compliments, it recalls a kinship, it laments a health, and somewhere near the bottom, in a subordinate clause, it asks the lady to move the Queen's grace in a certain small matter, and the writer will be her true beadsman forever. With it comes a gift, a barrel of good wine, a gold ring, 6 yards of velvet, sometimes plain money in a purse, and no one blushes. And the lady picks her moment. That is the whole art, and it cannot be taught. And everything you have learned about the Queen's face and the Queen's mornings goes into it. Not when she is dressing, not when a letter has come from Ludlow, not on the day the King's new fancy was discussed in the outer chamber, but, perhaps, in the quiet hour after supper, when the sewing has been put down and the fire is low, and she is in a good humour, and the lady says, "Madame, as it happens, I have a cousin, and the Queen, who has been waiting all evening to see when this would arrive, and from whom, says, 'Tell me.' That is a lady-in-waiting's power, and it is not small. Great men wrote to these women. Great men waited on their answers. In the correspondence that survives from families of this century, you can watch a knight in the country instructing his wife on precisely which lady of which household to approach, and what to send her, and how to word it. The women were the arteries of the kingdom's business. Nothing came near the heart, except through them. It has a price. The moment you are seen to have influence, you are worth corrupting, and there is always somebody in the chamber who is taking money from a faction and telling herself it is nothing. And a queen who has spent her life among enemies knows there is such a woman and often knows exactly who. She lets her stay. It is useful to know where the leak is. Sometimes she puts something into it deliberately and waits to see where it comes out. Everybody in the room understands this game. It gives the laughter its edge. And when you have understood all of that, you have still not understood these women, unless you go with them to the chapel. Because the fiercest thing about this world is that its faith is not a decoration either. Elizabeth Woodville prays at dawn. She keeps the fasts. She goes on pilgrimage in state to Canterbury and to Walsingham, where half of England goes. Walking the last mile, she endows chantries where priests will sing for the souls of her dead, and there are many dead. She takes up a Cambridge college, begun by the last queen, and left half-made, and has herself named its foundress, and gives it statutes. And it is called Queen's College, and the apostrophe is placed after the cease, because two royal women who were enemies each gave it their name, and the college would not choose between them. And you may go and look at it any day you like, and it is still there. And it is the reason her name is spoken kindly in one small corner of England to this day. Her ladies pray beside her. They own books of hours, the most personal objects this age produces, small painted volumes with the offices of the day in them, and prayers for a safe childbirth, and prayers against sudden death, and in the margins, in a woman's hand, the births and deaths of her children written down where the calendar is. Those small painted volumes are the diaries this century never knew it was writing. Such a volume is buried with her, or left in her will to a daughter, and the daughter writes her own children in it, and that is how a family remembers itself, in the margins of its prayers. They believed in purgatory, and therefore in the enormous, urgent usefulness of the living to the dead, and it changes the shape of everything. When these women give alms at a chapel door, they are performing an act with an exchange rate. When they pay for masses, they are shortening somebody's pain. When the Queen founds a chantry for her father, her brother, the two men, Warwick beheaded on a hill in the north, she is doing what a daughter can still do for them, and it is the only thing left that she can do, and she does so unfailingly for the rest of her life. So there they kneel, in a cold chapel at the far end of a corridor, 7 or 8 women in murrey and blue, with their beads running through their fingers. And the boy choristers of the Chapel Royal are singing a polyphony so beautiful that 4 centuries later, people will still be reconstructing it from fragments. The candle flames stand straight up. The Queen's face is entirely quiet. They are praying, most of them, for the same 3 things: for the King's health, for the Prince to live, and for whatever it is each of them is carrying, and cannot tell, and will not tell, and takes to the grave. There is one morning in the calendar when the ladies of this chamber kneel on stone in front of strangers, and it is the strangest and the most beautiful duty in the whole of their service. And it happens on the Thursday before Easter begin with the office that arranges it. The almoner is a priest of the household, with a clerk and a coffer and a book, and his business is the giving away of things. And it is not a sentimental post, it is audited. Each day the broken meat from the tables goes to him, and the surplus loaves, and he stands at the gate and distributes them. And the poor of Westminster know his face better than they know the King's. He keeps a list of the household's regular pensioners, old servants past work, widows of men who died in the Queen's service, a blind man, a woman who has lost her wits and is fed anyway. On the great feasts the giving doubles. On the deaths of the family it doubles again, because alms are prayers with hands. But on Maundy Thursday the Queen herself comes down. The number of poor women brought in is the tally of her own age, and this is the rule, so that the count rises with her. One more soul fed for each year God has given her. They are found by the almoner in the streets and the almshouses, and they are the genuinely poor, and they are washed first at the gate, which everybody involved understands and nobody mentions. They sit on benches in a hall, and the anointed Queen of England comes in among them in an apron with a linen towel over her shoulder, and kneels down on the stone at the feet of the first of them, and she washes that woman's feet. in water scented with sweet herbs from a silver basin, and she dries them with the towel, and she signs them with a cross and kisses them, and moves on her knees to the next, and does it again and again, 35 times. Because she is 35, and behind her come her ladies with the basins and the towels and the wine, and the chamberers and the almoner with his book, and the whole apparatus of the most ceremonious household in Europe is on its knees on a stone floor in front of 35 women who own nothing. Afterward, each poor woman is given a hamper of food and cloth for a gown, and shoes, and a purse with a penny for every year of her life. And the gown she wore that day is given away. And they go back out through the gate into a life that will kill most of them before they are 50 yet. You may say it is theatre, and of course it is theatre. Everything in this palace is theatre. She is enacting the gospel in which a king washed the feet of poor men on the night before he died, and she is doing it in public because it is meant to be seen. And it is one of the oldest arguments Christian kingship makes to itself, that the height of the throne is measured by the depth of the stoop. But go and watch her hands. She has done this every spring since her coronation, and she will do it in seasons when she has been called a witch in a parliament, and she does not hurry. And she does not flinch at the state of the feet in front of her, and she talks to the women, and she remembers from one spring to the next some of their names. And her ladies, kneeling behind her with the basins, will tell you, when they are old and everything else has been taken from them, that of all the ceremonies they attended in that reign, the crownings and the christenings and the jousts and the golden feast at Reading, the one they never afterward spoke of lightly was the Thursday morning when the proudest woman in England knelt on wet stone in an apron and washed the feet of the poor of Westminster, one after another, until her back would not straighten. That is the household you have joined. It is ruthless, and it is watchful, and it counts everything. And once a year it goes down on its knees to the people it has spent the other 364 days not seeing. Twice a year at least, and in this household oftener, each woman in the chamber makes her confession, and I want to talk about it, because a modern listener will otherwise miss the single most important room in a medieval woman's inner life. The Queen has her own confessor, a friar or a doctor of divinity, a man of some learning who is a member of her household and eats at her expense. And the ladies mostly use him too, or a chaplain. And there is a small dark corner of the chapel, and there is a stool, and there is a curtain, and there is no anonymity whatever. Because he knows exactly who you are, and so does everybody who watched you go in. You examine your conscience beforehand against the 7 deadly sins in order, and there are books to help you do it, and they are ferociously specific. Have you envied another's gown? Have you spoken words that lessened your neighbour in the hearing of others? Have you laughed at a servant? Have you been proud of your birth, of your beauty, of your needlework? Have you desired the death of any creature? Have you kept back anything in confession before? Out of shame? Then you say it. And there is penance, and there is absolution. And here is what later ages find nearly impossible to feel. The relief is enormous. This is a world in which each soul carries a running account against eternity. And purgatory is not a metaphor, but a duration, a term of years, and it is understood that you will serve it. Confession, penance, the Mass, the alms, the prayers of the living, all of these draw down the debt. So when a woman rises from that stool, she is not merely comforted. She has done something practical about her own future. And there is a second truth which nobody will say, which is that the confessional is the only place in England where a lady of the Queen's chamber may speak. She has sworn to reveal nothing of her mistress to any living creature. But a priest is not a creature in that sense. The seal of confession is absolute, and the Church has burned men rather than break it. and everybody in this palace knows it. So the woman who has carried something for 3 years and cannot say it to her sister or her mother or her husband can say it in a dark corner of a chapel to a man who may never repeat it. Even if a king asks him, that is where the secrets went. Not into letters, not into diaries, which they did not keep, into the ear of a friar sworn to silence, who died and told nobody. And that is why we have chronicles full of battles, and not one page of what the women knew. Some idle afternoon, while the Queen sits with her lawyers, lift the lid of a lady's coffer, because everything she has in the world is inside it, and the inventory is short enough to speak. Each lady has a coffer. It stands at the foot of her bed or against the wall of the outer chamber, iron-bound, with a lock, and the key is on a ribbon around her neck, and never off it. Inside is her whole estate. There is her spare linen, and the 2 gowns of livery, and a good gown of her own that came from home. There is a fur tippet, second-hand, remade. There is a purse with the fee she was paid at Michaelmas, and has not spent, because she is saving for a thing she will not name aloud, which is either a dowry she must make up herself or a lawsuit her brother has begun. There is a pair of gloves given to her by a person she will not name either. There is a comb of boxwood, and a small mirror of polished steel in a wooden case, and a pot of an ointment that smells of roses and mutton fat. There are the little tools of her trade, needles in a needle case, a thimble, a pair of shears, a wooden bobbin of gold thread wound with the greed of somebody who knows what it cost. There is a book of hours, and it is the most valuable object she owns, and the only one that will survive her. Her mother's name is written in it, and the day her father died, and a prayer against sudden death that she says every morning, and a folded scrap of parchment that has nothing to do with prayer. And there are 2 or 3 letters, and those are the reason the coffer has a lock. That is a life. Consider that the woman kneeling with a covered dish before the Queen of England, in cloth of the Queen's own colours, owns less than her mistress spends on a pair of sleeves, and that she is nevertheless, by the reckoning of the country she comes from, an extremely fortunate woman, fed and warm and safe and connected. When out beyond the gate there are women her age with the same face and the same hands who are carrying water in Westminster and will be dead at 40. The chamber never says this out loud. But the chamberers are in the room, and they were somebody's daughters too. And there is not a lady in that household who has not looked at the woman scouring the hearth and thought, for one uncomfortable second, of the small distance and the accident of birth that separates them. Wills are the one place these women speak. Look through the wills of the gentlewomen of this century, and you will find them dividing their coffers with enormous care. This gown to my sister, my second best beads to my goddaughter, my book of hours to my daughter, and after her to her daughter. 20 shillings to the poor of my parish. My russet gown to Alice who served me, and to the Queen's Grace, if it please her, my little cross of gold, in remembrance. That is how a lady-in-waiting speaks to history. It took her whole life, and it is 4 lines long, and she chose every word. Now let us think, since you are young and lying awake on a pallet in a strange palace, about what happens to you afterward, because service is not a life, it is a passage, and everybody in the chamber knows what it is, a passage too. You will serve perhaps 3 years, perhaps 8. And then, one day, she will call you to her, and there will be a proposal for your marriage, and she will have had a hand in it. That is the transaction completed, and it is why your family sent you. A girl who has served in the Queen's chamber marries better than her portion alone would fetch. She is known. Great houses have seen her at close quarters for years and formed opinions. And the Queen, who has spent a lifetime placing her own relations, is very good at this, and she takes a personal interest, and she will often add to your dowry out of her own purse, and she will stand at your wedding. The man will be chosen for his land, his family, and his loyalties, and you may see him twice before the ceremony, or you may know him well. He may be 40 and a widower, he may be 19 and a fool. He may, and this happens more often than the ballads allow, be a decent man of 30 who is quietly delighted, because a wife who has served a queen is an asset to a household with ambitions. Your consent is required by the church, and it is genuinely required, and marriages have been annulled for want of it, and yet you will consent. Because everyone you love expects it, and you have been raised inside this, and you want a household of your own. Then you leave. Your chest is packed, and the chamberers who lit your fire for 8 years say goodbye to you. And you are given a parting gift, plate, or a jewel, or a length of cloth. And you go down the water stairs into a barge and out of that room forever. Some ladies stay all their lives. Most do not. And now, at last, you come into your kingdom, and it is not what the poets say. You are the mistress of a manor, and you run it. Your husband is away at law terms, and at wars, and at court, and when he is away you are, in fact and in law, in command. You hold the keys, you keep the accounts, you order the sewing, you hire and dismiss. You defend the house. There are letters surviving from exactly such women of exactly this century, and in them a wife writes to her absent husband that the neighbours' men have come with weapons, and she has barred the doors, and she needs crossbows and quarrels. And would he send them? And also a pound of almonds and some cloth for the children. Nothing in her tone suggests she considers this remarkable. You will bear children, many, and bury some. And if you outlive your husband, which the arithmetic of this century says is likely, then you enter the strangest and freest condition available to a woman before modern times. A relict of property is in English law a person. She may sue and be sued in her own name. She may hold land, make a will, run a business, refuse to remarry, and no man on earth may compel her. And she keeps her dower, a third of her husband's lands, for life. That is why such women in this chamber walk the way they do. That is why every ambitious young man in England is looking for one. And the great women of this age, when you look closely, are so often widows, ruling their estates and their families, and sometimes their counties. Because for a few decades between one man's death and their own, they got to hold the reins of a life outright no. So sleep, girl on the pallet. You will be a queen's woman, and then a wife, and then, God willing, a woman with a seal of your own, and a household that obeys you, and a chest with your book of hours in it, in which somebody's granddaughter will one day find the names of your children, written in the margin in your own hand. Before we let this night take us, I want to be honest with you about what is known and what is not, because I have been telling you the shape of these women's lives with more confidence than the evidence strictly permits. And you should hear it said plainly. We have the Queen's household ordinances, and we have wardrobe accounts, and we have a coronation roll listing, who walked where. We have wills. We have some letters from families of this century, the marvellous, quarrelsome, penny-counting letters of the gentry, which tell us how such women wrote and thought and worried. We have the ordinances for the prince's household at Ludlow. We have a bohemian traveller's astonished description of a silent dinner. We have her statutes for the college she took up at Cambridge, and the account of her coronation and her will, which is 400 words long and breaks your heart. And of the women themselves we have, mostly, names in a list of fees, and nothing else. Her sisters are there, Anne and Margaret and Jacquetta and Catherine, and we know a little of what became of them. Some names appear in the accounts and never again, and there is no telling whether the woman was 17 or 50, kind or vicious, whether she went into sanctuary in the bad year or found reasons to be elsewhere. Some women stayed with Elizabeth Woodville when she had nothing left to pay them with. We do not have their faces. Nobody painted them. Nobody wrote their lives. When they died, their coffers were opened, and their gowns were given away, and their books of hours passed to their daughters, and the daughters' daughters sold them. And a few are in libraries now, with a woman's handwriting in the margin, recording a birth in a year when England was at war with itself. So when I have told you tonight what a lady of the chamber saw, and thought, and did with her hands, I have built it out of accounts, and ordinances, and the letters of women like her, and out of the shape of the rooms which we have, and the ritual which we have in exhaustive detail, and the silence which we have most of all. I have not invented her feelings. I have inferred them from a wardrobe list, and a will, and a folded scrap of parchment in a prayer book. She would not mind, I think. She spent her working life making sure that nobody could say, with certainty, what she knew. But she was there. She stood behind the chair for 2 hours without moving. She knelt with a covered dish. She held the basin, and the hand, and the secret, and she went down the water stairs into the barge, in the Queen's colours, in the light coming off the river, on a morning in the reign of Edward IV. 550 years ago. And if the only monument she has is 4 lines in a will and the smell of lavender in a linen press, then tonight, for a few hours, this has been hers. The light goes early out of a Westminster spring evening, and the palace changes at dusk, the way a face changes, and now the day of a lady in waiting comes round to its close, and I want to take you through it slowly, because everything from here on is downward, toward the bed. Supper is early by the standards you know, taken while there is still grey in the windows, and served in the Queen's chamber rather than in hall. And it is a small and civilized affair after the enormities of a feast day. A soup, roast fowl, a dish of fish, because it is a fast day, and this household keeps its fast days, bread and sweet wine at the end. The dishes come up through the passages from the kitchens under lids, carried by grooms who go no further than the door, where the ladies take them and bring them in on the knee. There is talk, and it is easy. The dogs work the room. Afterward, the torches are lit along the passages, and the candles in the chamber are trimmed, and somebody's fingers pinch out the ones nearest the hangings, because fire is the thing this age truly fears. The gentleman usher makes his round. Doors that have stood open all day are shut and locked and reported. The palace outside these rooms is settling down for the night. The great hall dark and empty as a cave. The kitchens banking their fires. A boy asleep against the flank of a warm oven. The watch calling to one another along the wall by the river, and beyond the wall, the Thames going about its old business in the dark. With the tide turning, and the mist coming up off it, and the 2 or 3 lights of a barge crossing very slowly toward the Lambeth shore. In the bedchamber, the unpinning. It takes as long as the dressing, and it goes in reverse. And this is the hour the whole household waits for, though no one would call it that. The headdress comes off, pin by pin, into a dish, and the Queen puts her hand to the back of her neck and rolls her head once. And this small gesture is the most human thing she does all day. The jewels come off into the coffer, and the key turns. The gown, the kirtle, the sleeves, the stockings, the fine linen shift. Her hair comes down, and it is remarkable. And one of the women brushes it out. 100 slow strokes, while another warms the bed with a covered pan of coals, and a third turns down the sheets. And here, in the last half hour, with the candles down to 3, and the fire red, and the door barred, and the world locked outside, the chamber speaks. This is what they mean by the secret world. Not the intrigue, not the wardships, not the letters. This. 6 or 7 women in their shifts, with their hair down, sitting on the edge of a bed and on cushions on the floor in a palace full of sleeping men, saying, in low voices, the things they have carried all day. Now the mimicry is unkinder and funnier. Now somebody says what she really thinks of the ambassador. Now their mistress, who has been the Queen of England since 7 this morning, sits with her legs drawn up under her, like a girl, and listens, and puts in a dry remark that lays somebody flat. And one of her sisters throws a cushion at her, at the Queen of England, and nothing happens except that everybody laughs into their hands so as not to wake the palace. And somewhere in that half hour, someone will say the true thing, that she is afraid for the boy at Ludlow, that the king was not well last month, and would not be seen by his physician. That a woman in this room has had a letter from a duke and does not know what to do with it. And whatever is said in the dark of that chamber will be gone by morning, unrepeated, unwritten, unrecorded, and it is the only place in England where any of them is entirely safe. Then it is over. She goes into the bed, and the curtains are drawn, and a gentlewoman lies down on her pallet at the foot of it, with her clothes folded under her head, and a chamberer takes the place by the door. And the last candle is left burning in its bowl of water, and the fire is banked with ash, so that it will be alive in the morning, and the room breathes out. It went on like that for 11 more years, and then it broke. The king died at 40, suddenly, after a fishing trip on this same river. The boy at Ludlow was taken on the road. She fled again to the abbey with her daughters in the night. And a chronicler saw her sitting on the rushes of the sanctuary floor, with her hair down, alone in the middle of her overturned coffers. Her brother was killed. Her sons were not seen again. And when it was all done, this woman who had been called cold and a witch's daughter and an upstart negotiated her girls out of sanctuary and lived to see the eldest of them, Elizabeth of York, married to the man who took the throne from Richard and crowned Queen of England in her turn. And that grave fair child of 6, already spoken of in treaties, became the mother of the whole Tudor line. So that every English monarch since has descended from the widow who knelt under the oak tree. Elizabeth Woodville died in an abbey at Bermondsey, out of the world, with almost nothing to leave, and her will said so plainly that she had no worldly goods to do the Queen her daughter a pleasure with. And she asked to be buried beside her husband without pomp. And her ladies, the ones who were left, went to that funeral. Nobody made them, so let the story set you down now, softly, where it found you. The candles are out but one. The curtains are drawn about the bed. The Queen is asleep, and the women who serve her are asleep around her on their pallets in the dark. You can let it all go now. The river, the barge, the corded chest, the long corridor and the guarded door. All of it folding quietly away like linen going back into a press. Let your breathing lengthen the way theirs has. There is nothing to keep watch over. The doors are locked. The fire is banked. The tide is turning. And every secret in that room is safe. And every one of them is being kept by someone who is fast asleep. Nothing more is required of you tonight than to lie here and be warm and let the dark do what it is for. And if this evening in the Queen's chamber has helped carry you towards sleep, and you would like more nights of this kind, you are always welcome to subscribe whenever it suits you, so that the next of these journeys can find its way to you. And a word below telling me where in the world you drifted off from is always a pleasure to come across. But that can wait for tomorrow, or for whenever you please. For now there is only the last low candle and the river and rest. Sleep well, stay warm, be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.